mom and dad? Okay.
So you called the police, but at that point you had already decided.
We had decided not to.
You weren't going to say anything.
We had decided that our feeling was not, we'll just explain what happened and it'll be okay. We were very stunned, and we felt that we would go to jail, obviously, and it was a selfish reason to just not want to have to go through that.
You are listening to the Roberta Glass True Crime Report, putting the true back in true crime. From New York City, Roberta Glass is now on the record.
Okay, how is everybody? Today, I want to talk about the Menendez brothers. Now, they are still all the rage, all the news, because there are two series. There's one series, dramatic series, scripted series about the Menendez brothers called Monsters out on Netflix. And there is also a documentary, and boy, is that documentary coming from the defense side, shockingly on Netflix, where we know the CEO's wife has donated to so many Innocence Project causes, soft on crime, DA's races. It's a big shocker that we are seeing a very pro-defense Menendez brothers documentary on Netflix. And the Menendez family, who we really didn't hear much from at the time in the 90s. What we heard from was the grandmother was their biggest advocate. I assume she has passed on since it's been 34 years since the Menendez brothers killed their parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez, in cold blood in their Beverly Hills home. But Rosie O'Donnell has become the Menendez brothers spokesperson on this case. After interviewing Lyle Menendez, and there was some interesting new media. And last time we were together, I played an interview she did with Mark Garagos on News Nation. And she said in the beginning, well, I spoke to Lyle, like she calls them for their own first name basis, the convicted killer and Rosie O'Donnell, of course. And I had to call Mark Garagos to see if, call Mark to see if I'm supposed to show up on this interview, meaning I'm really wondering who is paying for Mark Garagos, if this is Rosie O'Donnell's money. Now, they say Mark Garagos has been on this case for years, but who's been paying for him? Because when the Menendez brothers' second trial came around, they got a hung jury in the first. They were tried together with different lawyers. By the second time it came around, Leslie Abramson, my memory of it, and correct me, other people said she did it pro bono. My memory was that she was getting paid just a court-appointed attorney rate, which may be to her pro bono. She was at the top of her game. So Extra TV tracked down Leslie Abramson. So this is a lawyer that was on the top of her game, and in a really important detail that you need to know about Leslie Abramson is right before she represented Eric Menendez, she represented Arnel Salvatierra. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Probably not if you know me. Salvatierra, who killed his father. He was 17 years old when he killed his father while he was sleeping. His father was a newspaper guy, owned a newspaper. And what do you think the defense was in that case? I'll give you three guesses. It was that Arnel Salvatierra did this because he had been so terribly, extremely abused to the most extreme lengths, very much like what we saw in Leslie Abramson's closing argument in the first trial. She said Arnel Salvatierra would be what Lisa Steinberg, if you remember the Joel Steinberg Hedda Nussbaum case, poor little Lisa Steinberg was murdered by her father and mother with neglect and abuse. If Lisa Steinberg had lived, it would have been like Arnel Salvatierra. And so I found some interesting stuff. Here's Eric Menendez saying it wasn't perhaps the fact that Arnel Salvatierra, so the results of Leslie Abramson representing Arnel Salvatierra, was that he got convicted of voluntary manslaughter and given probation. So do you think that maybe Eric Menendez, say, found her because of that case? That she was also at a reputation, a crazy reputation, great reputation for getting people off of death row cases out of, where they were facing the death penalty, getting them acquitted or getting lesser sentences. She was, I don't even think there's an equivalent of this. I mean, we all talk about Johnny Cochran, but Leslie Abramson was just unparalleled in her success in the courtroom in her time. So here's Eric Menendez talking about how he found Leslie Abramson. Let's take a listen.
It's really amazing because when you get arrested, I didn't know anybody and I didn't know who to hire, and nobody really does. And I just got lucky.
Leslie
He just got lucky.
Get to the bottom of all
no
this.
one in his, darn it. No one in his family maybe did a tad bit of research or heard around that she was a powerhouse. He just got lucky. It was all luck. He just somehow fell into it, fell backwards into her representing him. So here's Leslie Abramson now. How the Mighty Have Fallen. I've heard she's broke. And believe that was from the journalist who said, I'm going to be careful about what I say about Leslie Abramson because I hear she's broke now, meaning I don't want to bring on a civil suit. So here she is. We've seen her representing Phil Spector. Last time we were together, I showed her walking arm in arm with Phil Spector into the courtroom. So that is her technique to show the media, the public, the jurors that she loves the clients she represents. They're not accused killers that make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. They're wonderful people that she wants to touch and get close to. So here she is now at a gas station filling up her very modest car in what can only be described as a smata. This dress.
Hi, Leslie. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
Eric's pitbull lawyer, who became a media sensation during his and Lyle's 2 trials in the 90s, retired last year. Abramson has stayed out of the spotlight, but cameras tracked her down in the wake of the news that LA District Attorney George Gascon is reviewing their case for possible resentencing.
How do you feel that the Menendez brothers might be getting their case reviewed?
I make no comments about my clients, none whatsoever. Attorney-client privilege never died.
The renewed interest in the case is coming on the heels of the Menendez brothers documentary where they speak from behind bars.
Everyone asks why we kill their parents.
And of course, the Monsters series from Ryan Murphy.
We did it!
Have you seen the documentary, Leslie?
No.
You haven't
documentary?
I mean, no, in the series on Netflix. Have you
That's that I heard about?
You-
No, I don't watch any of those.
You're not watching any of it, Leslie?
No, I didn't watch the last series, and I don't watch any of the shows about it.
Leslie's only comment in the Netflix documentary was, "No amount of media nor teenage petitions will alter the fate of these clients. Only the courts can do that, and they have ruled." The next hearing in their case is set for November 20.
So that was one of her tactics, to talk about them as boys. She referred to them as boys. She had them wear pastel sweaters. I believe that was her, from her genius mind. They were not boys. Eric was 18. Lyle was 20. They were adults living in their parents' home. And when the subject of being disinherited came up, and their father was rewriting his will, and they erased it from the computer. So took a little bit of liberties in my song. They didn't, I mean, they basically rewrote it by breaking into the computer after the murder and erasing it from the computer, essentially rewriting it, erasing. I mean, that would have been his last will, whether it was signed or not, or whether it would have been, I don't know, argued. But he left, was going to leave everything to Kitty. And if Kitty died first, it would have all been left to him, Jose. They didn't like that too much. And so what makes the Menendez brothers case interesting is two things. One is their complete lack of remorse. Their $700,000 in 1989 money, I did a little computing, would be $1.78 million in today's money that they spent in a matter of months before their arrest, buying Porsche, Jeep Wrangler, $15,000 on clothes in 1989 money for Lyle Menendez, $50,000 a month in tennis lessons for Eric. They were just spending money. This was not, I think what the Menendez apologists are saying is that would be normal spending. From what bank is that normal spending? From what money? They're not getting it. The reason they killed their parents, they didn't have access to that kind of funds. Their parents weren't spending that kind of money on them. Yes, they had private planes when their parents flew with them to tennis matches. I believe their uncle was a pilot. So sure, they had access to a private plane then. But they were upgrading from the cars that their father bought them to a Porsche and Jeep Wrangler for Eric Menendez's girlfriend, et cetera, that she drove, et cetera. So they never showed any remorse, but they had this 911 call, which you heard in the beginning, which was like this explosive, like, ah! Just like, this real weepy 911 call. And then they had just sort of like very flat affect, seemed to have no remorse, not a care in the world in court. They didn't really seem to sweat it. They showed zero feelings for their actions. And then they proceeded to bury their parents, including their mother. So their defense was, this is super important, not just that their father abused them, but that their mother abused them, and that they were in fear for their lives. At the time, they thought from this arguing that the family secrets came out that Lyle wore a wig. Come on. That he wore a wig. That was a big, and that spilled that was like the beginning of opening Pandora's box, and all the family secrets came out, starting with Lyle's wig. It was the Pandora box of wigs. And they thought they literally were in fear for their lives from their parents who thought they were going to kill them as they ate ice cream and watched TV. And we watched them lie on the stand in the first trial. saying, oh no, they weren't eating ice cream. There was ice cream on the table and the TV was on, but they weren't watching TV. They were in full discussions and we thought they were trying to kill us. That's why they couldn't be just watching TV. The mother, it was a brutal overkill of the mother. Then they went downstairs and reloaded the gun. But now they've been made, thanks to a bazillion TikTok videos. In a previous documentary, I believe, now they've got Rosie O'Donnell as an advocate for them. She interviewed Lyle, and because Rosie O'Donnell had the same experience with her father, right? Alleged that the Menendez brothers allege, and I don't think it was, I don't know, she doesn't go into detail, that she's going to advocate. She says 34 years is enough. And last year she was on Vinnie Politan, not my favorite, as you know, if you've been following this case. I find him to be, what does Kate Peter call him? A disingenuous douche. I mean, I just don't enjoy. I don't think he's genuinely presents these cases the way he really feels about them. I think it heavily depends on what the public perception is of the cases, and he follows that as, if it's popular, he's going to advocate for the Menendez brothers. If it's not popular, he's not. And I don't have a lot of respect for that. So here, Rosie O'Donnell is on Vinnie Politan's show talking about her relationship with, let me just go back a little bit, the Menendez brothers. He does these long openings.
Has now been uncovered. It's been uncovered for a couple of years, but it was nowhere to be found at the time that these cases were tried.
Right. So this was a letter. So everybody talks about this letter that details this abuse from Eric to his cousin. And we know from one cousin who didn't testify for them that they were asking, Lyle was asking him to get on the stand and lie. So here's a letter that supposedly was written 9 months before the murder that details, in a vague way, but details nonetheless, if you want to read it that way, could be argued, let's say that, could be argued by a defense lawyer, that this details some kind of abuse. It's like, my father comes into my room every night and what, yells at me? You know, maybe tells me to get a job. It's happening again. Okay, so it could be a real letter talking about something else, or it could be a letter written from prison saying, here's what I told you, here's the story. Because I don't understand why this cousin testified, he's dead now, but didn't hand over this letter to the defense. It would have been such great evidence 30 some years ago, and yet it's nowhere. And I find it also very interesting, going back to Leslie Abramson, she's like, client privilege never dies. Yeah, but you can still advocate for your client. No one's asking you to say what Eric Menendez told you. But she knows it's all BS. She's like, I'm not getting paid for this anymore. I'm not advocating for these clowns. I know why they really did it. Come on. I wasn't born yesterday. Pay me a couple million. Then I might do some talking. But I don't do that kind of lying for free, is essentially what she's saying. But here's Rosie O'Donnell, who's been, I believe, preyed on by the psychopathic Menendez brothers, love bombed. We'll go into that in a second. And here she is, gobbling it all up with not a skeptical question to be found anywhere.
And in this letter, Eric alludes to being the victim of his father. And that was one of the issues for the jury. Are they really telling the truth? Or are they just making this up because they got caught? So that's what we're going to talk about tonight, because someone else...
Are they making it up because they got caught? Because it was such a successful defense for Eric Menendez's lawyer in a previous case. How about that, Vinny? With just a tiny bit of research, you can go back to a previous case of Leslie Abramson's where her client got probation for killing his father while he was sleeping. Granted, he was a minor. He was 17. He really was a boy. But Kim Kardashian, of course, has jumped on. But Kim Kardashian has never found a convicted murderer that she hasn't wanted to free. And I've gone into depth on those cases, from Purvis Payne, which is one of the worst cases you'll ever hear about in your entire life. Murdered a mama, Charisse Christopher, and her baby daughter, Lacey, and tried to kill her son, Nicholas Christopher. He miraculously lived. And now it looks like he has been taken off of death row thanks to Kim Kardashian's advocacy. He was caught fleeing the scene. I ran into a police officer who's covered in blood, later found hiding in an attic. I don't know how much more guilty you have to be. His DNA has been found all over, including when the Innocence Project retested the knife in that case. His DNA was found. Of course, they found some incomplete DNA, which means it'll never be matched to anyone, probably just hanging around the kitchen knife. So the press went with that and ignored that his DNA was found on the handle of the knife. He also confessed to it on the stand as he took the stand, but now his sentencing has been changed to life in prison, and he will come up for parole in a couple of years and may be released for killing a mama and her baby and trying to kill her toddler son. I mean, that's just, you have to have a screw loose to advocate for that guy. But okay. Rodney Reed, same thing. Horrible, horrible history with that guy. Of SA and ultimately murder and SA of minors. I mean, just the worst nightmare. He's on death row for a reason in Texas. She's advocated for him. Julius Jones, another one where the Innocence Project said, all we have to do is test the bandana in this case, where they didn't back away when the DNA came back with their client. They just doubled down on innocence the same way they did with Purvis Payne. Another one, Kevin Cooper. She's got like, that's another one where they tested the DNA in that case. Came back with Kevin Cooper's DNA. The prosecution was like, well, no, we don't want to test it because we didn't even argue these things in court. They're not pertinent. We don't want to do the testing. Kamala Harris wisely said no. It was over. Jerry Brown eventually went through with the testing, and it was like a miracle it came back. The guy must have touched everything. That guy, Kevin Cooper, broke out of prison to kill an entire family, and I think the son lived, and the child's friend who was sleeping overnight was murdered by Kevin Cooper while he was broken out from prison. That's another one of Kim Kardashian. Boy, now add the Menendez brothers to that list. But boy, does she have a knack for picking cases where the Innocence Project asked to test the DNA. And usually it'll come back like no DNA found, like matching, you know what I mean? No DNA of the person found because like either they wore gloves or they know it's not going to be there or whatever. But like in these three cases, it all came back with the client's DNA. And the Innocence Project didn't walk away. Kim Kardashian didn't certainly walk away. It just renewed their feeling of innocence. Okay, enough of this crazy.
Just talking about it. Joining me tonight, comedian, actress, author, producer, television personality, and now the host of the Onward podcast, where she is talking about this case. Rosie O'Donnell joins us. Rosie, great to see you tonight.
Good to see you. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Welcome to our world of true crime, justice, and trials. Is this something that has always been a passion of yours, or is this a newfound interest because of this particular case?
Well, it's interesting, Vin. Years ago in 1996, when my talk show started, I received a letter from Lyle Menendez, a very long, involved, beautifully written letter that said that he had heard something I said in his defense back then, talking about the case, and he wondered if I had lived through something similar.
Right. So he sussed her out as a mark back then. She was defending them back then. And when was her show? The late 90s, early 2000s? That was not a popular opinion to have. By the second trial, I think it was very much contested during the first trial. But by the second trial, everyone had concluded that they had killed their parents for their money. They didn't have years and years for an aunt to have new memories come forward with new memories and to find a letter that was in storage. But where's the envelope to that letter? I'd love to know where the envelope. Can they prove that was where that was mailed from and at what date? And what a weird thing not to turn it over. To me, this sounds like some serious Billy Flynn, Chicago-style defense tactics. So he susses her out as a mark and says, we're just alike. Rosie, I know you're a millionaire talk show host. And at that time, she was super popular. But me and my killer brother were just alike. I got one of those letters when I worked for Oprah from Amanda Knox's friends of Amanda, her friends and family. And that's what got me interested in that case. And they know the things to say. They know how to manipulate. But unless you do your research, unless it springs you off, and it took a long time with Amanda Knox because we weren't really getting good information in the United States here about her case, and still don't. But they're very effective, these letters. They know how to reel you in, these killers from prison.
And at the time, it was a very jarring conversation, and it kind of scared me. And I don't know that I was ready to discuss things, private things that belonged in our family.
Really, you didn't want to? It was jarring. You didn't want to discuss your private feelings with a convicted killer. Shocking, a big shock.
Family, and I talked to Barbara Walters, who had just interviewed them at dinner with Cindy Berger, and she said, "Oh, Rosie, he's a manipulator. You don't want to get involved with him." And so I never wrote him back, and I always felt guilty about that. But I'm not somebody who gets involved in true crimes. I don't listen to the Serial or, all of those things.
She doesn't know to listen to the Serial, but she knows the name of it. How much do you want to bet she did listen to Serial? How much do you want to bet that she does donate to the Innocence Project? How much do you want to bet that she consumes a lot of this media? That's just my guess. When you live through dark things, I find a lot of the people who are attracted to this have lived through a lot of dark things themselves. And Barbara Walters, who went to my alma mater, Sarah Lawrence, good for her. Rare moment of wisdom.
Things, and like you were saying, Scott Peterson, I have no understanding or never had any interest in that case, but the Menendez brothers, watching them on trial in their first trial when they were allowed to have a defense, when they had 51 witnesses in their defense.
When they were allowed to have a defense, they were allowed to have the defense. It was just narrow. They were still allowed to bring up the abuse. It just could not be the crux of their case. It just could not be. What they didn't want to happen the second time is to put Kitty and Jose on trial. They weren't on trial. That's what happened the first time, in my opinion. But even Mark Garagos, if you listen to him, he says that they were allowed to bring it in. He's like, a large part of their case was cut out. That's their defense lawyer talking, but not all of it. It's essentially the same case, and that's what happens second time around when you have a hung jury, when you don't want the taxpayers to keep having to pay for this again and again and again. Something has to change. Things get narrowed down. And sometimes it happens on the prosecution side too.
And the DA didn't win because there was a hung jury. So what happened is they decided, the DA, whether or not this is legal, you can tell me, that at the second trial, presided over by the same judge that had been presided over the first one, the boy
Stanley Weisberg, not a particularly conservative judge. This is at Los Angeles. I love it. She's like, the same judge, the same horrible, unjust judge that strangely got them an acquittal and got half the jury on their side. It's so horrible. The first time when we liked the outcome, sort of, not enough, I guess. It was hated by Leslie Abramson because, he wouldn't let her run the court. She wanted to run the court. You could watch the trial. It's amazing. You would think that, she was just a phenomenon, Leslie Abramson. And as a young woman watching that, you just want her to win. You don't know anything. You're not thinking two people were brutally murdered. You're not thinking about death, what it means. You're just seeing a woman who's just so it's like watching a tornado or a volcano or something. It's amazing. You're not thinking about the destruction it's causing. You're just thinking about the power of it. And here's the line. The judge is so unfair. It's the little guys. It's the little millionaires up against the big state. These guys had $17.5 million of their parents' money. And by the second trial, well, I guess it was a little less. They inherited $17.5 million. And what? They spent $700,000 on clothes in 1989 money. So they were broke by the second trial. So, this is a multi-million-dollar defense, and it almost worked.
Boys were not allowed to use any sex abuse evidence. How is that fair?
That is untrue. I think she needs to talk to Mark Garagos.
So it's like
she was sitting on, what's interesting? She says this now, but she was just sitting in a separate box, as Mark Garagos says. It was largely left out, not entirely. They pared it down for the second trial. Oh my gosh. And so it's also another thing that's going on here is when you're a celebrity, to become famous, you need a lot of belief in yourself and belief in what you're saying, especially as a talk show host, right? A lot of confidence. And that confidence becomes your enemy because you think you know everything. You think all the information you're getting is good information. And the small amount, and you don't need to really review the whole trial, talk to a lawyer, read the appeals documents, maybe. You have feelings, and those feelings and the few things that you've read are good enough. And Lyle's letter and the guilt that she felt for not answering it. But isn't it interesting that she overrides her first feeling of being creeped out and self-protection? And now when she has her children, so she adopted a lot of children. She had And now that they're leaving the nest, this is another thing that the Menendez brothers really play on with women, is they're feeling like, oh, they could be my sons. You're not thinking that, oh, they could be my sons and they might kill me. I think a lot of women have very motherly feelings towards these boys, as they're called, boys, even though they were adult children refusing to move out of their parents' home and determined to get their parents' money.
The DA lost fairly, and then they changed the rules and they stacked the deck and they didn't allow them to have.
What do you mean the DA lost fairly? They didn't the DA lost, and did she not understand that the defense also loses when you get a hung jury? Everyone loses. It's a loss all around.
Their own defense. So I go about my life. I'm not following the case at all. And I see the new documentary, Boys Betrayed, on Peacock, where Roy from Menudo was telling his story. And I felt compelled to reach out to them and say, I know what it's like to grow up in a family with that kind of dynamic.
Right. But we also don't know who, there seems to be some money behind the Menendez brothers. If Mark Garagos is representing them, there are some possibilities about what's going on behind the scenes. I could not know, but I find it very odd at the time when this was the most hotly debated topic. And I understand that, you're quiet, you don't want to talk up, but why does he speak up right at the time when Mark Garagos is representing him? Does he have a friend in prison that's been offered a favor to help out? Has he been offered something? What you have to wonder when he comes forward, when it's being used so publicly to free killers, what is he getting out of it? Because the first thing we heard about this, it was in an affidavit for the Menendez brothers before the documentary. Watch A Murder in the Park. It'll really give you a glimpse of a lot of the shady tactics that defense attorneys will use, and Innocence Project groups behind the scenes. They'll guilt the hell out of witnesses, get them to change their testimony, eyewitnesses. That was done in Watch It. They'll be offered book money, movie money, documentary money, perhaps, to say certain things.
And
they have a friend in prison. They'll be offered lawyers, those kind of things. It happens.
I want to understand what happened more fully because I believe them. I believe that they were incested, and there's a lot of evidence to prove that they were. There's physical evidence, there's photographs, there's cousins and first-person accounts. So I wrote a little TikTok, and then Lyle's wife, Rebecca Menendez, reached out to me.
Right. These are things that I don't remember ever being, when they're talking about physical evidence, going through the boys' records and saying that they wet their bed, which is also a sign of psychopathy, interestingly, that they grind their teeth, that they had damage to the back of their throat. All this stuff was not brought up in the first trial. So I'm suspicious of. There is an odd picture of them naked. Could have happened, but it doesn't excuse it. And it doesn't give. So here's where the disjoint is for me, is that the reaction of spending money is the reaction of a greedy person, greedy children who wanted their parents' money. Also, right before the murders, they were robbing their parents' neighbors, not just once, but multiple robberies. And just taking everything, massive things, massive robberies, not small robberies, massive robberies. And Eric was convinced to take the fall for all of it, because he was a minor. He was 17. Lyle was 20. at the time. I believe he was 21 at the time of the murder. I may have misspoken, said 20, but I believe he was 21. Am I wrong? He's got that January birthday that's always very confusing. They're full adults. Lyle had gotten kicked out of Princeton University for cheating. So they have a history of being dishonest and greedy. Then coupled with their flat, bizarre affect that they went through this, in stark contrast to their weeping on the stand and their boo-hooing in the 911 calls, it becomes a little harder to believe in context of all of the evidence, not just the cherry-picked defense talking points. You got to look at it in context of the totality of the evidence. It's just not believable for me. I think Jose was a hard dad. Do I think he was abusive? Yes. But I don't believe it in the ways that, they're saying also, then you also have to add Kitty into this, because they were also saying Kitty was also abusive in the same way. Something that Rosie doesn't want to talk about. Then that becomes just statistically more unlikely. Then coupled with their bizarro defense that their parents were trying to kill them, I think it would lead a reasonable person to conclude that they're liars.
And said, Lyle would like to talk to you. And that was in the spring. And we've been talking a lot and come to know each other. And I support who he is as a person and what he's done. And I feel 34 years for a crime that occurred at a time when our culture was not ready to believe that fathers raped their boys.
What was this, the Dark Ages? We all believe these things happened. This was not the Dark Ages. Before the internet, no one believed anything. Come on, Rosie. She knows. She's older than I am. She knows this to be untrue. These are the talking points she's gotten from the documentary, and she's convinced herself of it. It's bizarre.
On your podcast with Lyle Menendez about this letter that Eric had written. And let's take a listen to that first.
My father's sister, her son, Andy, Eric used to correspond with him in the early 80s and late 80s, I guess. They were both teenagers. And she found a letter that Eric wrote, and that had been in storage for 25 years. That wasn't about directly all about the sex abuse, but referenced it pretty graphically.
It wasn't all about it, but it referenced it pretty graphically. No, it wasn't graphic. The stuff I haven't read wasn't graphic. It was vague at best. Vague at best.
And so,
whether we're being shown a edited version because of YouTube and whatever, maybe. But I don't know. It was vague to me. I just also happen to think, if I had to guess, I would think that Eric was writing that from prison. These don't look like letter writers to me. Like they just write. The phone call was still invented back in 1989. I would have thought that they would have called his cousin and talked, not written a letter back then. They're pen pals. I can't imagine them having pen pals unless they were in jail and preparing for their defense.
Amazingly, she did not actually give it to anybody, my attorneys or anything. She gave it to Barbara Walters for a show because she just didn't think there were even any appeals going on. And, just so much time had passed by that she just didn't think about it. But eventually we saw it on that show. People investigated and realized that it was a letter that no one had found, had not been presented at trial, had been in storage for 25 years because her son had died in 2003. So she just packed everything up. And so it's very powerful evidence because it was written 8 months prior to my parents' death.
And that's the significance.
To their death, to their murder. That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. Like, she handed over the letter to, so the defense team had it, but then they handed it to Barbara Walters, who didn't do anything with it either. She didn't have any interest in that letter either. And then that just got ignored. And then so she packed it up. Come on. Lyle knows what he's doing. He's answering my question. Why? He's like, oh, the defense team did have it. They didn't want to present it in court. Would have been great evidence back then. Super evidence. But we didn't want to do that. We wanted to save it for Barbara Walters and then throw it in a box and not bring it out for 34 years. Come on. It's ridiculous.
So you're talking about corroboration, right? You're alleging something. Did you say anything about it before the killing? And he did. Let's put it up here. We have a piece of that letter. This is from Eric.
Not the killing, their death. Their death. Their death. Let's talk the way Lyle talks. Their death. Like it just happened. They just died of old age, both of them. Oh, this stuff just burns me up. It's just so untrue. The falsehoods and true crime and how they get celebrated. And this will release. And if you watch my last 2 episodes on the Menendez brothers, this might release them, because we have George Gascon in there who has a whole department to review convictions, because they really don't want anyone in there for more than 20 years. My boyfriend said to me, you know, we pretty much disagree on everything, politics wise. And, you know, I think it's good for me. I think we're good for each other that way. You know, it's good to have your opinions challenged and to see things, you know, in a different view. And he's like, I'm not sure I believe in these long sentences. And then he's like, but these guys so cruelly. And then he came in and he said, you know, I realized it's so easy for me to say no one should do more than 20 years when I don't know anything about the case. So much. It's so nice as a hypothetical when I don't know any of the details, and say, let those people out that I don't know anything about, but the people I do, keep them in, because I don't want them walking the streets. This is why we cannot have these kind of, like, you know, there's a organization like no more than 20 years in prison. That's the whole point of it. They don't want anyone doing more than 20 years. So I think he's also down in the polls to Nathan Hochman, George Gascon, the DA of Los Angeles, who's reviewing this case. And I think he thinks it will make him maybe get reelected if he can release them ASAP, or promise to release them ASAP.
Menendez to his cousin Andy. It's still happening, Andy, but it's worse for me now. I can't explain it. He's so overweight that I can't stand to see him. I never know when it's going to happen, and it's driving me crazy. Every night I stay up thinking he might come in. I need to put it out of my mind. I know what you said before, but I'm afraid. You just don't know Dad like I do. He's crazy. He's warned me 100 times about telling anyone, especially Lyle. Am I a serious wimpus? I don't know if I'll make it through this. I can handle it, Andy. I need to stop thinking about it. And that's Andy Cano, his cousin. And Rosie, this is corroboration. This is like when someone is sexually assaulted and they cry out to somebody, to a witness. I mean, it's him himself writing this letter to his cousin Andy, who testified at the first trial.
Correct. And this evidence really follows their story and their truth, and what I believe to be the truth of the case, that here was a family and Lyle was sexually.
Their truth. There is no such thing as their truth. There is only the truth. Their truth. Their story. The story, you know, the story that I like to believe. You know, I'm going to take a quick break from this. I'm going to come back to this in a second. But I want to look at, just to give this some context, at how psychopaths. Hold on one second. Let me close this. Too many things open. I really envy the people that have other people to pull things up for them while they're live. Please hold, guys. But she said, she wants to take Lyle out to Nobu after he gets out. I mean, come on. Here we go. When you love a psychopath, 4 phases and 4 repercussions, because I think they are in a love relationship. I think Lyle has gotten Rosie to fall in love with him and his brother. Some ways. It's hard to resist psychopaths. They're seductive and charming. This is from Psychology Today. And they make you feel intoxicatingly special. But make no mistake, they disregard one's feelings and lack empathy. Narcissistic psychopaths in particular are unable to understand what's outside of themselves and yet rely on constant admiration from others to prop up their fragile egos. What is it like to have a relationship with a narcissistic psychopath? What is it like to fall? That's what a weird sentence. What is it like to fall? No, comma, nothing. To fall, have a relationship with a narcissistic psychopath. No, this was the central inquiry of a study conducted by psychologists Alexandra Inez Galind and Ruben Rodriguez Puteras of the University of Almería in Spain. In order to pursue this question, the investigators recruited 20 women between the ages of 24 and 59 who had addressed partnering with a psychopath on their Instagram profiles and were engaged in treatment as a result of the experience. The participants were interviewed about the relationships, the 4 phases of the cycle, love bombing. So in this phase, recognizing a psychopath is incredibly difficult. They present themselves, even though Rosie may have recognized it initially. Because she was creeped out and was like, took the wise advice of Barbara Walters to stay away. They present themselves as the perfect partner, often using knowledge. So perfect person, let's just say here. Let's use a little, often using knowledge about their victim to craft a persona. So they knew that Rosie had this history that aligns with the target's deepest seated emotional desire. So this must have been when she was on The View and not when she had her show, right? If she was talking to Barbara Walters. And that's when she came out, because I don't think she was out about that till a little later. Victims are convinced, so they may have seen that story in prison, and it's like, maybe we can use it. Moreover, psychopaths often tell a story of personal hardships in which they were traumatized, i.e. suffered in previous relationships. By portraying themselves as victims, they manipulate their partners into feeling empathy and taking responsibility for their well-being. This emotional connection makes the victim more willing to divulge intimate details about their own life, which the psychopath uses to maintain control. So the more they know about you, the more they can use it to manipulate you. That's why it's so important to go no contact with psychopaths. While the victim feels connection and reciprocity, the psychopath is on an entirely different plane. They thrive on the attention, admiration, and emotional supply they receive, whether it be in affection, compliments, or gifts. Their joy comes not from genuine love, but from the satisfaction of being the center of someone's world and successfully executing their manipulative tactics. So then devaluation will come after they're released. Right now they need Rosie. This fade begins once the victim has established a strong emotional attachment to the psychopath. At this point, the psychopath demands copious attention while also isolating their victim from social support network. This isolation encourages the victim's reliance on their psychopath. Like, hey, Rosie, we have something really special. You really understand me. We understand each other. We've been through it. So Rosie's not going to listen to anyone else who says like, hey, not that hey, this is like unhealthy. Hey, he could be manipulating you to get out using your connections. And then the discard phase comes. And I think she will be discarded once they're out, once they don't need her anymore. In this phase, the psychopath believes the victim is fully trapped, emotionally drained, and no longer useful to them. With little warning, they abruptly end the relationship because the victim no longer provides the attention or a means to an end, meaning i.e. get out, or emotional reactions they crave. The psychopath moves on, leaving their victim feeling confused, disoriented, and often completely dependent, sometimes even financially devastated. I don't think that would do something, but they can spend money. The Menendez brothers, I think it would be quite something for the Menendez brothers to financially devastate Rosie O'Donnell. The victim may have given everything they had, thinking they were investing in a genuine relationship. Even worse, the psychopath typically has already begun a new relationship, re-entering the love bombing phase with someone else. And then they come back for hoovering. The final stage in the cycle refers to the famous vacuum brand Hoover as a symbol of the manipulative tactic of trying to suck the victim back into the cycle of abuse. This phase often starts with the psychopath reuniting their love bombing, tending to strike when the victim is beginning to heal and regain independence. If the hoovering is successful, the victim is sucked back into the destructive pattern. So the repercussions, pathological lying. All the women stated that their psychopathic partners were pathological liars, referring to the psychopath's mask and their hidden agenda. They noted their psychopathic patterns began lying from the start of the relationship, making up stories about themselves, their preferences, and even their educational and professional backgrounds. For instance, the majority of the women discovers that their partners were having encounters with other women from the onset. More than half of the interviewees shared that in order to heal, they had to kill the idealized image of the psychopath that they had constructed during the love bombing. So you can hear from Rosie O'Donnell, she didn't really get fully sucked in. The letter was part of it, but until she started the phone calls with Lyle, making a whole podcast with Lyle Menendez. I would love to look at her podcast playlist, and I bet it's filled with true crime. I do. I think she's totally fibbing there. Cognitive dissonance. All of the participants struggled with the contradiction that they fell hard for someone they admired, but had to reckon with the reality that the person they loved wasn't the one they thought they were, wasn't who they thought they were. The contradiction left the participants in a paralyzed state of indecision and ultimately made it difficult to break up. An existential moment. The women the psychopaths broke up with faced an existential moment. They were exhausted by the relationship and yet believed the psychopath would treat them well. Many psychopaths abandoned the relationship when the women were at low points, leading them to feel empty and without anything to offer a partner. Even worse, many psychopaths had already found another relationship. One participant reflected, "I was devastated. He had returned to my life after being with someone else, and all he did was compare me. But the worst part was when my father's cancer worsened and he was dying. What do you think he did? He disappeared." And psychological problems. When asked to describe in one word what their current state after having a relationship with a narcissistic psychopath, participants have often used and repeated the words ruined, broken, dead, and crazy. And then there's This is maybe not the greatest source, but I thought it was interesting, the things that they talked about in this article. It's from the Bustle, the 9 creepiest manipulation tactics sociopaths. I don't even know what a sociopath is. I mean, I get that they want to differentiate between violent psychopaths and non. I don't really get it. I really think it was a way to soften the word psychopath. And now they're trying to basically eliminate the concept altogether because it really doesn't fit in with the agenda that everybody can be rehabilitated when we know that psychopaths can't be rehabilitated. Even though it's not super common to deal with a psychopath in everyday life, whether you end up dating one, working with one, etc., is still an idea to spot them. They use love bombing techniques. They are super charming. They target vulnerable people. They know how to reel you back in. Psychopaths tend to have a near magical ability to reel people into their web, especially when they're trying to break away. To do so, they often engage in intermittent reinforcement to keep their victims attached. This involves being nice interspersed with being not nice, or lots of engagement interspersed with withdrawal of love and attention. Right when you think you're done with them or feel like you really like to end the friendship relationship, they'll figure out the perfect thing to say or do to get you to stick around. That's why it's important to stick to your guns. Like, you know, Rosie would have been much better off had she not ever answered that letter. They are quick to apologize. Sometimes manipulation can be spotted in the way they apologize. Psychopaths may give sincere-sounding apologies when they are not sorry at all. They will say whatever they think you want to hear. They use gaslighting. They rely on gaslighting to disempower their victims. This involves lying about their activities and making someone else think they're wrong when they're right, did something they didn't, or didn't do something they did. It's confusing, which is why it's manipulative. They don't show any remorse. Psychopaths are not able to show remorse for their negative actions, from the minor, such as lying to make themselves appear better, to the most horrific, such as committing crimes or maybe, say, killing your parents. When they engage in these acts, the creepiest thing is that they literally feel nothing. No remorse, no second thoughts, no concern. But they do want to go buy a Porsche and maybe a whole $15,000. What would that be now? That would probably be like $35,000 worth of clothing, $40,000 worth of clothing, maybe more. So no matter what they do, no matter how they, maybe not. Yeah, about double. So about $30,000 worth of clothing. So no matter what they do, no matter how bad or hurtful in their mind, or it was justified and okay, no remorse, no concern. They use empty threats. And they use excessive flattery. Think of psychopaths as car salesmen on steroids. They often know just what to say to make you feel good about yourself, or that you'll be more inclined to do what they want. She's in a super dangerous situation. And instead, the whole world's applauding her for it. Dean Walker says, Rosie needs a hobby. I understand she has had abusive periods in her life, so I'll try to be respectful. Well, yeah. I mean, as a child, but yeah, and a lot of her children have left the nest. She's had terrible trouble with the oldest of her children. And she identifies with them and it's a super dangerous situation altogether. Here we are, back to Rosie.
Abused by the father until he was 8. He told a cousin who was 18. That cousin talked to her mother, the mother's sister, and it stopped. But what he didn't know was that the father had started with his 5-year-old brother, and it went all the.
What is the proof of this? So this is Cano who testified, who got the letter. He's dead now. Curious to find. Does anyone know how he died?
The way up until Eric was about to leave for college. He got into UCLA or USC, I believe. And his father said, "You're not allowed to live in the dorm." And he started to cry. This is right after Lyle came back from Princeton with his mother, where they set up his off-campus apartment for him to start his second term. His life had sort of begun on the East Coast. He was a tennis player. He was set to start his life. They tried to indict them on the concept that they did this for money, but there was not enough evidence to do that.
I think, Rosie, there was enough evidence to do that because they were convicted. The jury eventually agreed with the prosecution, whose theory was, and it's just a theory, it's really hard to prove what people's motivations are. We weren't inside the Menendez brothers' home. But the prosecution theory was that they did it for the money, and that, I think, has the most evidence, not evidence found 34 years later, new stories, new witnesses come forward 34 years later with a multi-million-dollar defense team and a PR initiative and people looking to get rich on documentaries and TV shows with a new narrative.
So when the second trial came about and they were stripped of their defense, yes, they were found guilty at a district attorney that was looking for a guilty verdict.
Now, the other revelation you've alluded to, but I want to...
Okay, let's get serious here. Does Rosie really think, question for Rosie, does Rosie really think that a jury without Leslie Abramson, who's like she's just, can basically convince you that snow is hot, does she think that had they been allowed to present, she's like, with their multi-million-dollar defense team, they were convicted because their defense was narrowed a bit. They weren't allowed to go full steam ahead and put Jose and Kitty on trial. But does she really think that they would be acquitted of this? That they wouldn't be convicted of something when they reloaded the gun? So not only did so the problem with their self-defense, she thinks a jury would buy a self-defense claim? Does she not know that no matter what you do, that you can't kill your parents and go and reload the gun and just pummel bullets into them? That when you're 18 and 20 or 21, you can't just stay in your parents' home and kill them for inheritance and spend all their money and take their shoes and wear them to the funeral after you've lied and weeped on the 911 call and moved from hotel room to hotel room. This is one thing the Menendez brothers did because they thought the mob was after them after the hit, quote unquote, on their parents when they knew they did it all the time. So I guess these are things that the Menendez brothers feed her. Like, of course, well, we couldn't argue with our team. Of course we were going to be convicted. It wasn't because we were guilty. Our defense was strapped. Couldn't defend ourselves. Come on.
Play a piece of...
Jury who saw all of the evidence convicted them. They weren't acquitted. I mean, we can look at what happened with OJ or some of these famous acquittals, and we can disagree with them because sometimes I disagree with the jury, like in the OJ case. I can see where it went. I see where they went. We can watch now in retrospect how they got bamboozled. Mark Furman taking the fifth, et cetera, et cetera. But to the question of whether he ever planted evidence. That might put a question mark in your head as a juror. But let us not pretend that the Menendez brothers had some great case that they were about to get acquitted for. It was like a Hail Mary. It was amazing that it worked on half of the jurors, and it worked on the female jurors. The jurors who were really tuned into seeing these grown men as boys.
Of your interview with Lyle, talking about this revelation that one of the members of Menudo, the group that was on Jose's record label, he was an executive at RCA. Take a listen.
I did not know Roy and didn't know the fact that he had been raped by my father and was another victim. Came out through a documentary investigation they were doing on the band separately from anything related to Eric and I.
So, and there's a picture of Roy.
Isn't that interesting that he has to say, it just came out in the documentary. It's not like I think that sort of supports what I'm saying. There's some connection. I didn't know him. It just came out totally separately on the documentary. Could have happened. I just don't think it did. I don't know. I could be wrong. Rosie could be right on this point. You still can't murder your parents. Doesn't that look like a stunning coincidence? They were just doing a documentary and this explosive evidence came out. Not like his cousin was in the pen with me and, you know. I'd love to know if there is a connection, a prison connection between that or a family connection or some kind of connection. Because I didn't know him, and it just independently a documentary found out that he was also a victim of my father, just like I'm a victim as a child victim when I was a full-grown adult. Could have left and could have gone no contact. I mean, what a precedence this would set for California, that now you can just argue that you were abused and you can get out of your case. This was tried also with a Hollywood influence, interestingly, with the Bernie case, Bernie Tide case. When the director, I've talked about that case, when the director of Slackers, now I'm forgetting his name, got his case overturned. He went to a lawyer, got his case overturned, and they had to redo the sentencing thing to include his abuse. And he got sentenced to the same thing, life in prison. Made no difference.
Boy, who's making these allegations. So, Rosie, with this petition that is being made, there's different ways a judge can react to all of it, right? Can dismiss it outright and say there's nothing here. But if the judge believes there is something here, what should what should be next? What should the process be?
Okay, Bernie Tide killed Marjorie Nugent, who he preyed upon her after her husband died. He was a very rich in where was it? It was in Texas, East Texas, I believe. And he shot her in the back and kept her in the freezer and made up excuses and used all her money. And the film Bernie was made to make him look out to be a folk hero, and Marjorie Nugent to be the devil that no one liked. Her family disagrees deeply with that view. And he was let out because of the work of a attorney, Jodi Cole, and said his constitutional rights were violated in the first trial because of newly discovered evidence. Again, he further alleged in the writ that the 81-year-old Nugent was controlling and emotionally abusive towards him, and that he had murdered her in a dissociative state resulting from years of SA as a child by an uncle. And the Texas Criminal Courts of Appeal approved the writ, and he went to live with that director in his guest house. Richard Linklater's guest house. That's his name, Richard Linklater, who directed the movie Bernie. He also directed School of Rock and originally came on the scene in Slackers. Probably most people are probably too young to remember that.
And you may or may not know I'm a former prosecutor, right? So that's the way I see the world.
Yes,
my concern is the truth. And I argue all the time that we shield the jury, whether it's stuff about the victim or stuff about the defendant, we shield them a little too much. And in this case, we were shielding them from what the allegations against the victim. All this stuff to me is very, very relevant for a jury. But you're thinking he should be released as a result of this or get a new trial as a result of this?
I would hope then that he gets sentenced, he and his brother. The first question that
See, I don't want a trial to have to go. I don't want a new trial. I don't want a jury to evaluate the evidence. I want to be the only juror because I know the truth, because I've talked to these brothers. They've told me the truth. Me, Rosie O'Donnell, they're not going to lie to me because we're alike. The same history. And Vinny is like, this is like a year ago. This interview would be so different if Vinny Politan did this interview now. It would be like no skeptical questions would be asked, or one, and the rest would be like cheering her on. Because this was not as popular a year ago. It was just starting. The PR offensive is just starting. I know that it's even among my audience that is used to me having unpopular opinions on true crime. Because I was bamboozled by the Menendez brothers when I was 18 years old and didn't know anything about our legal system or life or human beings or psychopaths or what a normal reaction, what real grief looks like. All I knew is I just loved Leslie Abramson and I wanted her side to win. That's all I knew. And that the Menendez brothers had lived close to me and had also been competitive swimmers like I had been. So I was doing very similar things to Rosie, over-identifying with the killers. You got to look at the totality of the evidence, not just your cherry-picked evidence that's come 34 years later and hasn't been evaluated, has only been presented wholly by the defense. Hasn't been evaluated and certainly we haven't seen a cross-examination of this new witness. He signed a sworn affidavit, but he hasn't been cross-examined.
That Lyle answered on the stand was, "Are you responsible for the death of your parents?" And his answer was yes. They were young. They were 21 and 18 when this happened.
What was he responsible for the death of his parents? Was he responsible for the murder of his parents? The murder, Rosie. The murder. Not the death, the murder. You guys getting bored? I'm just so shocked. Responsible for the death of your parents. Yes. The murder, the brutal, bloody. Like, we hadn't seen anything like this. It was such an overkill. And when they emptied all their billets, they went back downstairs to the car, reloaded, and came back up again. The mother was crawling to get away. It's really hard to argue self-defense when you have someone crawling away from you. I mean, you could argue that it was the most cowardly murder.
And this was years and years and years of being built up, and they had no choice in their mind, the mind of a tortured and abused, sexually incested boy, that
Boy, they were adults. And Eric Menendez was in therapy, whatever you think of Jerome Oziel.
made the only choice that felt safe to him. He felt he was going to be killed by the father, and the father had threatened that to him, had said, if you tell Lyle, I'm going to kill you, Eric. They were not only horrific sexual deviants, but there was, you know, pins put in their body and their thighs and their penis. It was horrible, torturous abuse.
The same kind of torturous abuse Leslie Abramson argued in the Arnell Salvo Terra case. What a shocking Kowinski dink. But I'm sure Rosie hasn't even heard of that case. Kitty, it's just Leslie Abramson just gets a lot of these kind of cases. The worst abuse you've ever heard of in your life. Because it can't just be your run-of-the-mill essay. It's got to be over the top. Thank you, Kitty's 1993. This is the kind of show often gets demonetized, so I appreciate it. How is killing due to past SA different from killing for other reasons of retribution? It's essentially taking the law into one's own hands. Thank you, Kitty 1993. Finally, some common sense. This is like bizarro nutty hour here with Rosie O'Donnell. You can hear the minimization and the dehumanization of the parents. And that was something that happened in the trial too. You know, Jose Menendez, you heard Pamela Bazana talk about in the documentary that he was not well liked. Secretary loved him, but it was really hard. She couldn't get anyone to testify anything positive about him. Kitty was very well loved, but not Jose. I mean, he had it hard. He came here from Cuba, worked as a dishwasher at, I think, the 51 Club, and worked his way up to a record executive and then a film executive. He had a big smash hit with Dirty Dancing, which is like in a hit in a way that we don't have anymore. I mean, women would go and see that movie in the theater like 7, 10, 20 times before Netflix. And it was just a tiny little, it was just a massive, massive hit. And they had invested very little money in it. So he had really focused on his career, and maybe, you know, some of the interest in this case was Jose a psychopath that created either by biology, psychopaths. This is what the prosecutor says in the documentary, that ended up killing him, but also taking Kitty out, who was, by all accounts, a very devoted, loving mother who tried. But that's not what the Menendez brothers say. They had the worst abuse, not just from Jose, but from Kitty as well.
That they suffered for the first 20 years of their life. Yes, they were rich, but that doesn't change everything. It doesn't change an incestuous household and the tension within there at the unspoken secret.
See, she's talking about herself there. She's saying, why didn't my fame, why didn't my money heal this? Why is there still this broken hole inside me? Why is it still here? Well, I can't fix things for myself, but I can make things a little better for these convicted killers, the Menendez brothers. And I really think, you know, a lot of times I say, you know, or I think, I don't know how much I say it, but I think it, you know, oh, they should, you know, move in with Rosie. But I really think Rosie would have these Menendez brothers move in with her. I think she's that naive. She wants to take them out to Nobu. Here's another article. It's also in the description. I won't go crazy. It's a little, I won't read all of it. I had it pulled up. Rosie O'Donnell, this is from USA Today, says she's like a big sister to the Menendez brothers, Lyle and Eric. Rosie O'Donnell says she feels like a big sister to the Menendez brothers, Lyle and Eric Menendez. In an interview with Variety published Friday, the former panelist on The View opened up about her friendship with Lyle Menendez, and how she thinks the brothers will be released from state prison sooner than later. We talk a lot, O'Donnell said in the interview with Variety. I told them I would do what I could with whatever dwindling fame I have to bring light to their story. The brothers are serving, so she's going to act as an advocate, meaning I'm going to talk to the powerful people I know. I'm going to put my money into that. That's what it means. I think she's paying some of Garagos's bill, if not all of it. The brothers are serving prison time for killing Jose. They just wrote Jose Hernandez. I think they made Menendez and Mary Louise Kitty Hernandez Menendez at the family's Beverly Hills home in 1989. Great job, USA Today. I'm not sure why Hernandez. Let's see. Let's open in a new link. Oh, it just links to Menendez brothers, so it's just a typo. It's like, is this some kind of name change I never knew about? The Variety interview took place one day after Los Angeles District Attorney George Gascon announced that his office would review new evidence of alleged SA brought forth by the brothers' attorney. The brothers have long maintained that SA is the motive for their parents' murder. Rosie O'Donnell says Barbara Walters called Lyle Menendez very cunning, correctamundo, Barbara, and a murderer. The former daytime talk show host heard from Lyle Menendez 30 years ago, but didn't support the famous older brother. So this had to be 30 years ago. Because O'Donnell says View creator and broadcasting legend Barbara Walters told her to ignore him. Walters died in December 2022, famously interviewed the brothers for ABC, but then O'Donnell came in 2 years ago as a cheerleader when the pair reconnected after the comedian watched a documentary that revisited the Menendez case and featured evidence that the brothers were essayed by the dad. I got a call from Lyle's wife. I didn't even know he had a wife, asking if I would talk to him. He called me on Mother's Day last year, adding that the brothers are excited about a potential release. She also shared that the Menendez brothers are happy with calls to be free. Well, they should. And she spoke to Lyle Menendez on Thursday night. I told them, you're going to get out of there. They didn't really believe me, but I believe that the wrong will be righted. They're still reticent to believe it's going to happen, O'Donnell told the outlet. She has also visited them in prison. During the interview, O'Donnell also detailed her visit to meet Lyle Menendez last year at Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility, the California State Prison near San Diego. This is really interesting, too, about Rosie O'Donnell saying that she's not into true crime. She also visited Martha Stewart in prison. She talked to Howard Stern about how she visited Martha Stewart in prison, and she came in all dressed down, and Martha Stewart was perfectly coiffed and crisp prison outfit and looked perfect. Where both brothers, and that Martha Stewart never got in touch with her after she got out. I saw Lyle and gave him a hug. Then Eric came over to me, hugged me, and whispered in my ear, "Thank you for loving my brother. It was very moving to me." O'Donnell even hinted at being present at the pair's potential release, saying she would be there if they want me there, of course, but I don't want to overshadow things, as if her celebrity would overshadow it. She told Variety the brothers are going to need a lot of therapy to figure out how to be in the world after having been in prison for 35 years. They have therapists in prison, Rosie. And the former Rosie O'Donnell talk show host has a gift for Lyle Menendez. If the brothers are released from prison, a meal at the celebrity hotspot Nobu, which boasts a slew of locations around the country and world. I've always told Lyle that I will take him to Nobu because he thinks that's the place to go. Buddy, when you get out, I'll take you to Nobu. When I talked to him the other day, he said, when are we going to Nobu? I said, sooner than you think. Oh, it's just a heartwarming story of a killer and his celebrity pal. I'll tell you.
So you've got two people who've been convicted of murder. The ultimate sentence, they've had all their appeals. The appellate courts have not found any reason to send it back. So this is new evidence, which does kind of open the door a little bit at this point. And you're saying re-sentence these two.
Yes, that they should be sentenced for manslaughter, which if they had had those charges, they would have been out 10, 20 years ago.
Oh, absolutely.
They've been in 34 years. 34 years. Yes, they were abused the first 20 years of their life in horrific ways, and they've been imprisoned for the next 34 years of their life.
Well, see, so she's talking about Lyle, who was 20 or 21 when this happened. And Eric was 18. It was the first 18 years of Eric's life. They were abused terribly. They couldn't walk out the door and get a job, start a new life. This is very prevalent, way too prevalent in our society, by the way. I think it's like 1 out of 4 boys and 1 out of 3 girls. But we cannot say that murder is okay. And that your story is, I'll believe this part of the story. So if you want to believe the Menendez brothers, I think you should believe their entire defense. That Kitty did it, Jose did it, they were in fear for their life. And money had nothing to do with it. And their supporters are saying that that was a usual spending spree. Where is there evidence of that was usual spending? If it was such usual spending, what were they doing robbing the neighbors? And so funny, she brings up Lyle's getting moved in by his mother to Princeton, to off-campus housing at Princeton University. When he got kicked out for cheating. So they have a history, a history of breaking the law, being dishonest. Believe it all, Rosie. Don't just pick and choose. Well, because I had this experience with my father did it, then his father had to do it. What about the mother? They claimed in court that under oath that the mother did it too. You got to believe believe it all. You can't pick and choose. This isn't a menu at Nobu. Or you have to believe they're liars.
These men at 50
with a very successful defense team with private investigators, et cetera, in context to make it look like 34 years later, this happened. Because sure, on the stand, the affect was way off with Eric. I've watched a lot of every case I've been in court with. It's been a case of terrible abuse. And I've never seen an affect like Lyle or Eric's on the stand. Didn't look like any of the, it doesn't mean, it's not the only reason why I don't believe them. Certainly didn't come off like any of, there's all sorts of spectrums of normal reactions to this kind of abuse. And they were way off the spectrum of normalcy.
55 and 53 have never known freedom. They have never had a day of violence before that night, nor the 34 years following. Neither of them. And
you can't know that, Rosie. And first of all, it's pretty violent to rob your neighbors. I mean, what do you call that? Niceties? Cheating? Robbing? What do you want to call cheating and robbing? I don't know. It's a form of violence.
And Lyle is one of the most respected inmates there in San Diego and in all of the California system, truthfully. He's gotten his college degrees. He started organizations for sexually abused inmates. He started the beautification project of the prison system based on the Norwegian system that he studied. He's a brilliant, kind, and loving man, and he knows what happened to him. And I think for victims all over the world, freeing the Menendez brothers would free.
She is a loon. This woman is not right. She is 2 sandwiches short of a picnic here. The Norwegian system. Hey, lovely Sphinx. Nice to see you. Thanks for the super sticker. Norwegian system. I'm all for them beautifying the prison. I have no problem with that. Just keep them in it. He's a loving man who just happened to rob his neighbors, get thrown out of Princeton for cheating. And brutally, I mean, this was so brutal. I mean, you can listen to the police officers and they finding the scene. There's like, it was just so over the top, horrifying, horror from the depth of like your worst nightmare horror. I mean, we've only seen like, you know, edited scenes. I know some of it's in Faces of Death. I've never wanted to look at Faces of Death, but it made Faces of Death. Let's just say that. She's like, he's a loving man. She's out to lunch.
Them as well, emotionally and spiritually.
So I guess the question is, and I don't know if a judge is ever going to take that leap. I mean, it could happen, but bring in the mother, bring in, have perhaps some level of a hearing to at least test the veracity of the allegations by Roy from Menudo. Take a look at this letter, verify that. And then the question is, how do you get, though, from being a first-degree murderer to be resentenced? You have to be recharged. I mean, if the prosecution doesn't agree to it.
There is a line to resentencing, especially for children, for people who are considered children without their brains fully formed at 26, I believe it is. And they were 21 and 18. So there's a special track on that for.
This is like Chicago, which is like the center of innocence fraud, has now redefined 26 as the age when your brain didn't develop. It used to be 18, 21. Now it's gone up to 26. So Chicago, they're resentencing. So now, because I've talked about this, I've had so many episodes. Go back to my episodes with Jane and also the founder of the National Organization of Victims of Juvenile Murderers. And juvenile crimes are some of the worst crimes. So if you are a juvenile and you get life, so there's a huge movement to get rid of life without parole for juveniles. So if you got rid of the death penalty for juveniles, which the founder of the National Organization of Victims of Juvenile Murderers, who I've interviewed, also had on Jane, mostly I've had on Jane so many times. We've talked about these juvenile cases. And they've changed the law all over the country to have juveniles who've committed some of the worst crimes who were given life. So if you're given life as a juvenile without parole, it means that whatever you did was so heinous, meaning your age is such a mitigating factor. It's such a powerful mitigating factor that it has to be really overwhelming and horrific if you're getting life at committing without the possibility of parole as a juvenile. But they're changing that all over the country, just like so that after 15 years, you can get out if you committed some of the worst crimes as a juvenile and were given life. Now she wants to make the Menendez brothers fall under that category. Come on, this is wild.
Resentencing on people who fit into that, who's committed their crime before 1990, and the men committed their crime in 1989. So they are, available for this new track that is now on the books. And I'm hoping that the district attorney realizes that as a culture, we're not ready to accept the truth of what the Menendez brothers told us about our country and child sexual abuse. We were unwilling to believe.
So a new track that's on the books. meaning he started a whole new department to look into convictions, because what George Gascon did and what he did with DAs all over the country is said, I'm going to be the kind of DA that's just not going to advocate to lock people up anymore. I'm going to advocate to free them. And my interest is no longer going to be with the victims and the victim's family. In fact, I'm going to totally get rid of the department that tells victims' families members when their loved one's killer is up for parole. Get rid of that, so we'll totally get the victim's family out of the parole process and get these convicts out faster, easier, more easily. I'm also going to just advocate to not get rid of it. Gun enhancements, not charge people, not actually prosecute people. And he's actually never prosecuted a case in his life, George Gascon, as a DA. And get former defense attorneys in here to really work against the victim's best interest and the victim's family best interest and the society's best interest, and work totally. So really what it will be is just another wing of the defense team. And we won't have an oppositional system anymore. We'll have a kangaroo court where it'll be two defense attorneys talking to each other in court. No prosecutor left, because and this happened in Baltimore with Marilyn Mosby and Adnan Syed. This new track. I mean, it shows you how little she knows about
it. And now as a nation, we have to right the wrong. We made a wrong judgment on these boys, and the district attorney's office acted in a way that was unethical.
We made a wrong judgment. What did they do that was unethical? What did they do that was unethical? She's out to lunch. I don't think she's ever attended a criminal trial in her life. This is how we're indoctrinating kids to think about our justice system, too. So unfair. Things happen very quickly that can't be righted. We did it. No, a jury picked by the defense and the prosecution convicted them. End of story. And every appeals team in liberal California, every appeals submission has been, every appeals court has denied them because they're very guilty. End of story. I'm sorry, Rosie, that if you were on the jury, that you would have voted for manslaughter, but you weren't.
And in my opinion, unconstitutional. But as you said, they have had their time. But times have changed now. People with the sex scandal.
I agree with you there, 1,000%. You put these facts in front of a jury today, it's a different ballgame, which is what I would suggest as a prosecutor. Listen, if there's new evidence, I want the truth to come out, and I want a jury to judge those facts and judge that truth and decide what this means. But Rosie,
there's a question whether or not
we don't need a jury. We just need Rosie O'Donnell and Kim Kardashian to judge what's best. They'll be the jury. Hey, lovely things. Rosie has aged so much. Doesn't she have the money for a plastic surgery? Well, I know she's taking Ozempic, that kind of drug right now. She's on that. Maybe she has Ozempic face. I mean, we all get old. But there is, I don't know. I wonder if you're honing in on something else, just the kind of misery, like even when she smiles, there's just something so unhappy about her. I loved her radio show. I thought she was brilliant on Sirius as a radio host. I listened to her a lot. I thought she was great at it. So I don't have anything against Rosie O'Donnell. Didn't always agree with everything she said on that show, certainly. But I thought she was just great at the medium, so it was fun to listen to. But there's something deeply unhappy, and I notice this with women who adopt a lot of kids like this. They just keep adopting kids. Like there's not enough, like, looking for love. And then when you listen to her oldest daughter, first adopted daughter, talk, she said mostly she was locked in her art room listening to Joni Mitchell and Eminem. We didn't see her, and we were raised by nannies, which is so weird. Why adopt kids if you're going to do that?
Whether or not a trial 30 years later, with some of the people no longer alive, the witnesses, would that be the best way? And how much it would cost? And, you know, there are 30 members.
I don't believe in the price for justice, though. Like, the price for justice is what it is, right? I mean, we want the truth to come out.
Right, but there's another avenue. There is another avenue for people who have served 34 years of their life.
She's like, witnesses have died. Yeah, that benefits you. A trial this late and Vinny knows that as a prosecutor. Hold on one second, guys. Vinny knows that as a prosecutor. Rose is like, would that be fair? Maybe they would, because she thinks she knows the facts are damning. She's like, I don't want that. I don't want another trial. I don't want any of these people to be cross-examined. It's expensive. I say they're innocent. Come on. Trial by documentary. Let's go by trial by Netflix documentary. Who produced that, too? It is so pro-Menendez. So hard to watch. So over the top. And this is what made this case interesting. Is that Jose was not so likable. We hadn't seen a figure like this in true crime. You know, I was new to true crime, so I didn't know anything. But I don't think I've seen a figure like him since then. Wasn't very likable. So we were like, did he create these monsters? Were they created? And if this kind of abuse did happen by the father, which still makes them liars, because I don't think anybody thinks the mother did it, this kind of stuff. The mother who was going to their tennis matches and writing their, I'm not saying that this means that she couldn't have done this, but just, I don't know. This seems unlikely to me. I mean, what are the statistical chances that you get both parents doing this kind of stuff? But okay. I mean, this is a crime that's done 90% by men. Just statistically unlikely that you're going to hit the horror jackpot and get two parents to do this kind of stuff. But even if this is true, I mean, wouldn't the abuse make them more dangerous? And more unable to deal? I mean, if the way they dealt, if it's true that the way that they dealt with this kind of abuse, this is really the truth here. If this is true, so let's say I'm wrong and Rosie's right, and we're cherry picking what we're going to believe of the Menendez brothers. Doesn't this show that they have no means to deal with this kind of abuse? That they're acting out, cheating at school. This is all acting out, cheating at school, robbing the neighbors repeatedly, and then killing your parents, and planning an alibi and then wailing to 911, pretend crying in a 911 call and playing the victim immediately. Doesn't that show that they don't have any ability to really handle what happened to them in a way that is productive for society?
In prison, if there is new evidence that would have changed, and to say there is another sexual assault victim would have done a lot towards believing these boys back then.
Oh, yeah.
And I believe that Roy Rosello is a hero, and that I hope that other members of any group that Jose Menendez was responsible.
Isn't it interesting? But Lyle didn't know him. His father represented them, and it was strangely the one popular Latin band, and they're the Hispanic with a Hispanic executive in charge of their thing, and the Menendez brothers never knew them. Really? I know the Muda was constantly changing. But really? But she doesn't want him to take the stand. Why not?
Responsible for will come forth, including all the former Menudo members.
Rosie O'Donnell staying with us. I'm not letting you go, Rosie. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of the evidence that prosecutors presented in the case and how does that jive with everything that we're hearing now, plus coming up next hour. In Saratoga County, New York, it was a miracle.
Are you guys bored? I'm still interested. I don't know. I find this like just unbelievable. Here we go.
Company of his brother purchased 3 Rolex watches and some money clips. On September the 8th of 1989, 19 days after the killings, a life insurance policy which had been procured earlier by Jose Menendez was paid to the defendants. The policy cumulatively was for $650,000, and over a period of a week between September the 8th and September the 15th, $325,000 was paid out to each defendant. Lyle Menendez returned to the Princeton, New Jersey area after a memorial service for his parents, which was held in Los Angeles on August the 25th of 1989. Lyle Menendez had been a student at Princeton University in the spring of 1989, and the family had lived in the township of Princeton before moving to California earlier. During the initial few days of his stay in Princeton, Lyle Menendez hired bodyguards to guard him. Lyle Menendez and his bodyguards traveled around Princeton in limousines during this period.
There's a piece of the opening statement in the first trial against Lyle Menendez. There were 2 juries in that first trial, one for each brother, but just one trial. And there were times when the
traveled in limousines because he had to be guarded in Princeton, New Jersey, which is near to where I grew up. He had to be guarded in Princeton, New Jersey, where the crime level is 0. My father's alibi, Gascon, was the San Francisco DA who opted not to pursue charges against my father for my mom's murder. Oh, gosh, I'm so sorry. Even once they found out that I wasn't his alibi as he had originally claimed. And despite overwhelming evidence. It's shocking. I don't know. How did they get like this? How did they get to be such demons? Nice to see you, by the way. I subscribe to your channel. Yeah. Horrible. I mean, just to educate everybody, here's George Gascon. Hold on, let me just take down your comment so everybody can see. Hold on one sec. And thank you. How does this happen? How do you get to be such a... Here are 2 clips of George Gascon talking about, here's his philosophy. Okay, this is him talking about his philosophy.
My focus from the very beginning when I became the district attorney is I've been working already at the national level for almost a decade on criminal justice reform, really with a very strong focus on reducing incarceration. That was really, at that point in my life, that was really the goal. You know, my goal is much broader today, but, you know, as you will see during the conversation, I'm a product of evolving, obviously. So when I became the district attorney, I believed that we could find a balance between reducing crime and community safety and reducing incarceration. I think you could do both at the same time, and we proved that you could. And that was the primary focus at the time.
So when you don't charge anyone, crime goes down, amazingly. When no one's charged of a crime, amazingly, it goes down. It works out that way. So it sounds so good, right? Criminal justice reform. I just watched a thing on Gascon that the LA Magazine did, I believe. It's on YouTube. They're like, well, I mean, we don't want to go back to the systemic racist policies we had before that led to mass incarceration. I mean, come on. It sounds good until it's your loved ones whose murder isn't being prosecuted, until you're the victim of a crime, until you're living in a neighborhood, and mostly where these dangerous people are returning to, and mostly that's affecting poor people and minorities and the people they claim they're trying to help. Here is George Gascon. This is the DA of Los Angeles. And I forgot, thank you so much. I forgot he was the DA of San Francisco. I always think of Chesa Boudin, who also got booted in a recall. George Gascon, they have tried to recall unsuccessfully 3 times. He's been such a disaster for LA. He is behind in the polls to Nathan Hochman now, who's running as an independent against him. But here he's talking about how he took Open Society Foundation money. This is a very short clip, which is George Soros's group. How he took their money and picked out former defense attorneys and other soft on crime attorneys that would run as DA. And they would fund them with this Open Society Foundation money of $50 million, or close to $50 million, as he says in this clip. Take a listen to how he thought up this. I mean, it's such a devious, disturbing plan, because our justice system works in opposition. So if, say, a whole bunch of prosecutors got together and say, you know, just quit being prosecutors and start up a defense attorney, start working as defense attorneys and just work against your client's best interest so that they get more time and that they're convicted, so we can just mass convict people. This would be such a scandal, but because it's working the other way, and this is like crack cocaine to America, the idea of freeing people.
We
No one
literally
says
started
anything.
looking at the map of the U.S., and we were trying to identify strategically what are the urban centers where anybody that could be considered a progressive prosecutor. You know, there were a couple of people that had been nibbling in some areas, but we just couldn't find one. So one of the conversations was then, how do we go about creating a movement here, which actually eventually led to Open Societies Foundation, which is a George Soros Foundation, putting almost $50 million in 2014 through the ACLU to begin the movement. And, you know, people like Larry Krasner and others came to my office while they were running for office. In some cases, we identified people to run for office, and then many would come in after getting elected. They send their people in. So, like, for instance, Larry's number 2, at one point spent almost a month going in and out of my office.
So there's Larry Krasner. He's the DA in Philadelphia. Also been a disaster. Same way. That's someone that to tie it back in, that the Netflix CEO's wife. So often these CEOs don't want to donate themselves of large companies and seem politically motivated. So the money will be passed on to their wife. She gave a huge amount of money, was given from out of state to Larry Krasner's DA campaign. And one of those was the CEO of Netflix's wife. Now, I'm sorry, I can't remember her name right now. I look it up. I'll look it up as Rosie babbles on. I think we're near the end of this. I'm just so shocked. She's like, I don't want a retrial. What are we talking about here? I don't want a retrial. Just let them out. It's long enough. Their brain wasn't developed. Abuse excused. What else do I have here? Money doesn't fix everything. I know them. You don't. I need to go to Nobu with these convicted killers.
Jury came in and out, and you'd have one jury in, one jury out. But that was part of their argument, was these two young boys, the motivation was the money. They wanted the money. You know, there was the life insurance plus all the other assets that Jose had made through the years as a very, very successful music executive. Rosie O'Donnell, host of the Onward podcast, who has spent a lot of time with the Menendez brothers, is still with us. Rosie, let me ask you about this. Some of the evidence in the case, and as a prosecutor, this is what gives me pause from just saying sentence to time served versus, okay, if there's enough new evidence, let's have a jury look at it and make the call here. For me, it wasn't so much about the spending, it was about what they did beforehand, the planning of it all, the purchase of the guns with a fake ID, using someone else's name, making it look like a mob hit, shooting out the kneecaps, then hiring bodyguards after the killings to make it look like they still feared for their own lives, that someone's out there to get the Menendez family. And then allegations that Lyle tried to get someone to lie about what happened here. So when I put those pieces together, it makes me hesitate a little bit to just say, okay, time served, you're a victim of abuse.
Well, time served 34 years for the killing of the people who had sexually tortured and abused them for their entire lives. And it infiltrated into that family and
saying it's people now. So she thinks that both Kitty did it, because she only talks about the father. So she thinks that they were both that they were both abused by both? Really? So John Legend backed Larry Krasner's campaign. Richard Barton, the Seattle-based founder of the online real estate marketplace Zillow and travel site Expedia, maxed out to Krasner, as did his wife, Sarah. So did Patricia Quinlan, a Santa Cruz-based philanthropist and wife of Netflix co-founder Reed Hastings. Barton also sits on the board of Netflix. So if you're wondering why you're watching all this pro-releasing killer or pro-killer material on Netflix, you know, wrongly convicted this person, wrongly convicted that person, which, I mean, I just don't have a staff to fact check every single thing that comes out of Netflix. I would never stop. I would never sleep if it's just me. I mean, they've had so many things. They had on, I remember I fact checked some of them. One of them was the confession tapes, where they were advocating for the release of some of the worst cases, that they were all false confessions. Just the usual wrongful conviction narrative nonsense, innocence fraud nonsense.
As I said, it was a tinderbox. And when Eric was finally told that he could not go to college, that the father would keep him a sexual prisoner, he told his brother what had been happening.
Why did he have to be a prisoner? He was a full-grown adult. Turn him into the cops. What's stopping him? She's not answering the real question. She's not asking it either. She's not answering it, nor is she asking it. Why didn't he walk out the door?
The mother admitted that she knew it all along, and 5 days later they were dead. It wasn't that they were premeditated for months making a plan. This happened. They feared for.
Wow, they had a pretty good plan, though. Go to the Cheesecake Factory, go to the movies, and then discover their parents murdered. I think it took 8 months for the police to, that's my memory of it, I may be off, to actually indict them. And Eric confessed to his therapist. That's what started this all off. But they got away with it because they meticulously planned it.
For their lives, and they went out, and what the first person who came into the bloody crime scene saw was that this was rage. This was rage. And it looked like a mob hit because of all the violence and rage. But can you imagine if you were them and you finally got freedom?
So this is like Rosie O'Donnell fantasizing about releasing her rage? That's what it would look like if Rosie O'Donnell released her rage? That's the only way to release your rage? Not walk out the door? Maybe take up boxing or something? Some kind of outlet? It's the only way. They make it seem like they don't have a choice. They can only do these incredibly damaging things to other people because they're so damaged people. But they're healed now in prison somehow, miraculously. We don't know how. I guess the painting and this studying of Norwegian prison system. Norwegian prison system is ridiculous. I mean, it looks like they live nicer. They live like much better quality of life. I mean, if we could make it work, we could afford it. I mean, and they have great results with it. But it's tiny country, much different society than ours.
Freedom from it all. They lived a rich life their whole life. The father would wash them in gifts. They had many Rolex watches. Those were not their first nor their last. They were a wealthy, rich family, and the father liked to present them as such in public, in spite of the horrors that were going on in the house. So do I think their trauma response to...
Meaning they didn't have to murder for a Rolex watch. They already had one. But what kind? Certainly didn't have a Porsche, the kind of Porsche for the murder. These are all just defense BS talking points. This episode should be called How to Be a Dupe. How to be a defense, killer defense's dupe. To psychopathic killer and their sleazy defense team. How to be a dupe. How to believe nonsense. How to put your critical thinking aside and just believe whatever is fed to you.
Spending all this money after they finally were freed from that captivity. I think it's a trauma response. I don't think...
Captivity? What was their year? What was his years at Princeton? It's a year and a half at Princeton. I think he got kicked out as a sophomore. What happened to that? His years in captivity. He was held hostage by his parents. They couldn't leave. They didn't know how to work the door. They were so traumatized they didn't know how they had feet that they could walk out.
They tried to get them a case that they were doing it for money, and they could not get the indictment for them. The grand jury said, no, there's no evidence of that. The fact that they were spending as they had been spending, and also the amount of trauma they were in. When they first...
Wait, they were spending as they were spending. All right, I'm going to fact check this. They were spending $700,000 of their own money. There was no $50,000 tennis coach before this murder. There was no Porsche, Jeep Wrangler, $15,000 on clothes. Their father may have been spending it. That money. But you can't say, and some of it may have been going to them, but not all of it. He certainly didn't have bodyguards. Princeton, moving from hotel room to hotel room. They weren't living that lifestyle. A jury wouldn't indict them. They didn't go, a jury wouldn't indict them, so they had to think of another. Okay, so a jury wouldn't initially indict them because they rejected the idea that they killed for money. So they had to go back with another prosecution plan, right? Prosecution theory. That was exactly the same thing that they eventually argued in court twice and won eventually with. What are we talking about here?
Killed their parents. They sat down and waited for the police for hours. They did not know that the police were not going to show up. They didn't even have a plan for what happened after. They were waiting for the cops to show up. And
have you heard the 911 call? They didn't have a plan. Someone killed my parents. Ah. They didn't have a plan. All right, I'm going to end this pretty soon. We've been going for a long time.
They were going, and then Eric descended into some very serious emotional, they just killed their parents. Even though they're the parents that abused you, they're your parents. That's a trauma. And, their lives were full of trauma. And except for that night, Vinny, they have never had a moment of violence. Aside from that night, 34 years, they have been excellent prisoners. Lyle actually gets conjugal visits because he had a clean record for 15 years.
What about Eric? Does Eric get conjugal visits too, or is his record not quite as clean? As my mother says, he works in a jail. They have a saying there in that jail, which I would think would be applicable to prison. They're all so good when they're in jail. They all so well behaved. Prison is not society. Society. Let's go look at. Oh gosh, I'm thinking of. He was a juvenile killer. Oh, that serial killer who got out, who killed his grandmother, and then eventually killed his mother. I think. Oh gosh, I can't remember his name. He's in Mindhunter. Help me out. Why am I can see his creepy face. He's still alive, reading books for the deaf. He's enormously tall. All right, I bet someone's thought of who I'm talking about here. How is his prison record? I think there's Ed Kemper. Thank you, Sam R. Kemper. Ed Kemper. Yeah. How is his prison record? Isn't he, don't all the staff love him in prison? Isn't it exemplary too?
15 years. So I think we need to relook at this with new eyes. We need to look at the culture that was so unaccepting of this fact, of this truth, of this horrible statistic in our society about children who are sexually assaulted and incested by the people that love them most. And what happens to them as a result. 300 children kill their parents every year, but far more parents kill their children. And it's the ultimate taboo to kill your parents, far more much of a taboo than incest. And they were willing to do anything they could to save their own lives right after that happened.
Willing to do anything to save their own lives. Can you imagine being this naive? How do you get to be this naive? How do you get to be this naive? My boyfriend just came in and goes, "Oh, this is gold. Don't stop." So I know if he's interested, I'll keep it going for a while.
In 5 days, my father's been raping me. I'm telling you, Lyle, he told me never to tell you. The mother says, I know and you're guilty and you did it and you liked it. Lyle flips out, tells the father, you're not going to touch my brother again. Fights and yelling ensues. They go on a boat trip. They sit separately. They don't even talk to each other. They were terrified. And if you believe they were abused, you can understand why. And now there's new evidence of this pedophile rapist who...
Right. I don't like pedophiles. I want to kill them all. So, you know, they did the world a favor by killing the father and the mother. They were enslaved. They didn't have feet. They were enslaved by trauma. I mean, you know, I don't even hate Rosie the way other people do, you know? I mean, I would see this occasionally, or hear this occasionally, rather, and I would listen to her Sirius, the show on Sirius, which I did religiously. Maybe the only one. I don't know. Is it popular? I don't even know. I just loved it. I thought she was great at it. You know, I don't hate her. I just am in like awe of this mindset that's so out to lunch. That just, you know, I mean, I've talked to other, you know, I've had other comments on this case. People don't agree with me. But, and a lot of the talking points are the same. But they pick a few talking points. They don't pick all of them and then add more to it. I mean, she's bought all of it. Hook, line, and sinker. I mean, what are these phone calls? You know, the Lyle Menendez and Rosie O'Donnell's jailhouse calls. Doesn't that sound like they're going to play the jailhouse calls, Court TV? Instead, we have an hour of Rosie O'Donnell, just one crazy idea after the next.
Who raped Roy Rosello. And it's very, very effective testimony.
You know what this is? This is this really bad true crime thinking, which is, if I can relate to the accused or the convicted, if I get a whole bunch of salacious evidence, I don't have to question it. I don't have to check it out. I don't have to think that there might be an alternate meaning. And that's something or more context to it, or alternate motivations, or maybe have to question and think it was totally created by the defense team out of whole cloth for totally different motivations. I haven't seen the Menudo documentary, but we also haven't seen, you know, and for those that have seen it say it's very effective, but we also haven't seen the outtakes. It's very carefully crafted to push a narrative. And before that, you know, I'd really like to hear I would like a private investigator from the prosecution on to how exactly this all came to light. You couldn't have missed. I mean, you know, if he was in Menudo and it's like the head of his record label is like killed, and he watches their sons go on trial, and the most celebrated, this was like a mini OJ. Wouldn't you be like, oh, maybe I should help those kids out? I hated what that guy did to me. But why wait? I understand people wait for all different reasons. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. I just find it awfully convenient.
I want the folks to hear, Rosie, I want folks to hear another piece of your podcast where you're talking to Lyle about that time, this point in time just before the killings.
My brother was hoping that he would get out of this situation he was in with his father, where he was in you could call it he was in a sexual relationship with his father. Obviously, we know that would be considered like rape and abuse. It had been going on for a decade or more. And he thought he was going to be able to live on campus at UCLA, where he was going to be starting school that September. And when he was informed by his father that wouldn't be happening, he was going to have to stay at home. That my brother knew that meant the abuse was going to continue. There was really no way out, and he began to feel suicidal.
Right, because he didn't have any friends like Craig. What is his last name? Cariello. What is his name? I'm getting his last name totally wrong. But the guy he wrote the Friend script with about killing your parents for money, strangely, that he wrote before the murder, about a kid who kills his parents for money. And Dominic Dunn, I was just reading his essay of it's called Nightmare on Elm Drive, about the Menendez brothers' murder. His pieces in Vanity Fair were phenomenal on this case. He was in the courtroom for every day of the trial. He was put next to the victim's parents in the OJ case. Judge Ito, one of the wisest decisions he made was to put Dominic Dunn next to the victim's family in that case. But he did fantastic reporting. But one of the things that he said about this case was he was wondering if there was another copy of that script, an earlier draft or a later draft that went missing, that had even more parallels to this crime. This is not what the Menendez brothers had to do, and what you saw in the courtroom. Even I, as a duped 18-year-old, it was so obvious what they had to do was make it look not premeditated, make it look like it was reactive and spontaneous when it wasn't. He used his friend's ID to buy a gun. It's another odd lie they got caught in about the Big Five sporting goods and whether they sold the kind of ammunition or gun that was used in this crime. And they planned out their evenings whereabouts, meaning going to the Cheesecake Factory, going to the movies, to make it look like they had just discovered their parents. There was a hit, and they almost got away with it.
And then he knew that I was about to leave back to school in New Jersey on the other side of the country. And so before I could leave, he felt the need to sort of cry for help and tell me what had been going on. And that kind of cascaded into this last couple days before what happened, with me confronting my father and trying to rescue my brother from that situation, and that going horribly bad, and threats back and forth, and threatening to expose my father, and then my mother entering it, letting us realizing my mother knew, and arguments with her, and our level of fear, and just overwhelming, really, emotion, and just led to just horrific, life-changing events.
So this is the part that I think a lot of people are going to focus in on. He's about to go to UCLA. You're a freshman in college. You live on campus. I mean, that's part of the whole transition period. Now, he's getting an apartment. Some kids would say, hey, that's a plus. I don't want to live in a ratty dorm. I get my own apartment. Are you kidding? Down in LA, that's awesome. But what they're saying is this was Jose's way of keeping control of his son and putting him in a place where he would still have access to him.
Yes, completely. He was telling him, you will never be free of me. This is a boy who he controlled and raped nightly since 5 years old. Do you think that boy has any sense of freedom or self-autonomy or desire to live with the knowledge of what's happening with his own father?
Were they in therapy as children at all? Like, I don't know.
I'm not aware of that. I haven't asked him that. I don't think so. I think that Lyle is a bit more of the alpha, and Eric is much more sensitive and an artist, true. And you look at Lyle and you see a businessman with a social conscience trying to improve the life for prisoners?
Oh, he would be a regular Steve Bezos. If you weren't a convicted killer, former burglar, and a cheat that got thrown out of the Ivy League, he'd be a great executive. Oh, America's being robbed of such a great young mind, or old mind now. We're all so old. It's like when too many emotions. When you have too many emotions, you let your emotions get the best of you.
Prisoners, and have his life there without the possibility of parole have meaning for him still. It's a pretty phenomenal account of how both of these men chose to spend their time.
See, and then what this defense theory strategy does that's still ongoing, which is just absolutely demolish the parents, is say that their life had no meaning. They weren't even human. It wasn't that he was a unlikable, ambitious businessman. I mean, go to the top. I mean, anybody who's worked in an office knows that the nice people are not in the executive realm, right? If you want to go where the nice people are, they're in, they're in the mailroom. They're not, generally not, just as a general rule of thumb. So this guy, went to the top being a, hard-nosed businessman. And now his life wasn't worth living because his sons killed him for his money, and now have this line that he didn't deserve to live. And the mother did it too, with no evidence of them. Where's the evidence that the mother did it? Where's any evidence that the mother did this? Not one friend was told. Such a family secret that only the cousins came forward. And then the Kitty's sister now has a memory 34 years later that we never heard about at trial. Come on. Get out of here with this nonsense.
And they were just reunited in 2018 after, again, all of these years without a mark on his record. When they asked Lyle, is there anything that would help? And he said, could I please be with my brother again? And so they reunited them in 2018, and they've been living together ever since then in the same block of the cell. They did live together for a while, but now they're right next door to each other.
Oh my God, that almost makes them more dangerous. Because there was some talk at the time that Lyle was the real psychopath, and that Eric was like the follower. But I don't know I don't know how you follow your brother into murdering your mother and father like this without being a psychopath yourself, agreeing to this. There was some talk, and it was, of course, Eric who felt a need to confess in a way that Lyle didn't. Lyle, when Eric confessed to Jerome Oziel, the psychiatrist, who luckily for the Menendez brothers and their defense team, had his own sleazy history going with having a relationship with a patient, which the jury could frown on, and having a little bit, I think, of an unhinged, and this woman was a bit unhinged, in my opinion, that they were lucky, or else they would have really had nothing. Because after they confessed to Jerome Oziel, after Eric did, he went to Lyle and told him what he had done. I confessed to my psychiatrist. And Lyle turned to him and was like, oh, well, now we're going to have to kill him too. Like, yeah. I mean, that's like how deep. I mean, the guy's a stone-blooded psychopath. We have Rosie O'Donnell, who was maybe just born yesterday. Like, oh, he's a lovely guy. He paints. He's a businessman. Eric is painting in there, and Lyle is studying the Norwegian prison system. And what? And he gets conjugal visits, so he's well behaved in prison. Come on. It's bizarre that they're letting them next to each other, because they are more dangerous together. I mean, there was a reason why they were separated.
In the cells. And, to separate them, first of all, was cruel and unusual punishment. I mean, there are people in prison who are...
Cruel and unusual punishment. What is taking a shotgun to your parents' face?
Go with their mothers and daughters. When I went to visit another person I knew in jail, I said, who is, that's my mother and mother and daughter. They both were selling drugs for their boyfriends. So there are people who have life and long sentences who are related, who spend time together, but they seemed to want to separate them for the public thirst for revenge and cruelty. And they separated them for many, many years. And it's a beautiful...
It's not that we're interested in public safety. It's revenge. We have an undesirable need. And this is something that this movement does very well. I mean, if you look at the criticisms of this show and me, it's that I'm desperate to see people locked up. It's not that I'm desperate to see the rights of victims protected and have the victims remembered and keep our society safe. It's that I want people locked up. If you have a better way, there's a better way to keep society safe. But it's not working. Rehabilitation, all of these rehabilitation programs and the soft on crime policies have led to more violence. It's like we need the quick fix. We need the feeling that we're good people and that we're not the bad people that want to see people locked up. We're the good people that want to see the good in these psychopaths and want them free. The narcissism of this movement, this pro-killer, wrongful conviction movement that hates our justice system is really hard to take.
Beautiful thing that they get to be around each other again.
All right, Rosie O'Donnell is with us, folks. Onward podcast, incredible interview with Lyle Menendez, gives you great insight. When we come back, we've got a few more questions. Plus, we'll take a listen to some of the testimony of the Menendez brothers from the first trial.
Trial of the Menendez. The trial of the Menendez brothers. Weekdays 4 to 8, only on Court TV. Legendary Trials.
So Court TV was getting rich replaying it. I mean, this was really the first big trial for Court TV. First trial I ever saw on TV was the Menendez brothers trial, and first trial I ever got into.
Between the ages of 6 and 8, did your father have sexual contact with you?
Yes.
And how did it start?
Just started with, after sports practices, he would massage me, and we would have these talks, and he would show me, and he would fondle me, and he would ask me to do the same with him, and I would touch him. We would undress.
My dad came in and told me to take off my clothes and to kneel on the bed. And he closed the blinds and he put the slide underneath the door like he always did. And he told me to bend over the footboard.
That was the first trial.
I just don't believe them when they talk. It's the flat psychopathic affect, or I don't know. How do you respond to that? I'm curious.
For the Menendez brothers, the result of that was a hung jury mistrial. There was no conviction. second trial, there was, but the second trial was a little different. Take a listen here to a part of Rosie's podcast, the Onward podcast, where she interviews Lyle about that second trial.
Oh, so wait. Now Lyle's the reporter on his second trial because there's no record of it? I mean, you know what I mean? Video record. Now Lyle's going to be the reporter?
We really came into the second trial in a very different position in terms of the public.
And the DA and the same judge that presided over your first.
Right, the terrible female DA and terrible Stanley Weisberg, Pamela Bazanik. Oh my gosh. And they added a new one, Lester Kuriyama. He's excellent. Oh, no. He was in the first trial. He's in the first trial.
First trial was the presiding over this trial. And they decided together that they would not allow any evidence of the sexual abuse to be used in the second trial.
Untrue, Rosie. Just not all.
It was extremely limited. So
Do you know what limited means, Rosie? Even that's a bridge too far for a convicted killer. Because he knows he's going to get called out on that lie. He's like, no, it was limited. You know what limited means, Rosie? Not all, but some. How about that? And she's heard that, and in what she's arguing, she doesn't get that she's lying for a psychopath. They weren't allowed to bring any of it in. You weren't allowed to bring in any of it in? No, that's not true, Rosie. We were allowed to bring some of it in, not all. Oh, and then as soon as she's on court TV, they weren't allowed to bring any of it in. It was terrible. Their parents had literally frozen them into a pillar of salt. They could not move. The only actions they could make from the trauma was to go take their friend's ID and go buy guns and then murder them. That was the only response. They were such wounded, tiny toddler children that's the only thing they could do.
Put Eric in a position to just sort of have to take the stand and talk about it all without any real supporting witnesses and family members that knew about it. So, of course, that made it much harder for the jury to know what to believe. And then you had the prosecutor that they changed the prosecutor to somebody who was more aggressively willing to say that things were just not true, even though I think he knew that probably wasn't the case because he had excluded a lot of the evidence that showed that certain things were true.
So, Rosie, that second trial, completely different. That's one where court TV cameras were not permitted inside, so the nation didn't get to see it. And I always get
bossy Texas chick. Always so funny. If you subscribe to her channel, you're missing out. Bossy Texas chick. By the time Rosie gets done describing them, they will be embryos. LOL. True. They're just getting younger and younger and more traumatized and more abused by the hour. As the hour goes on. First, it started with Jose. Then it became both the parents. Now it's both the parents. Oh. So why this is also why I don't frequently get a second interview. Has anyone ever seen my dead asleep interview that I did with the director? That was his Innocence Fraud document. It wasn't all out. It had enough innocence fraud nonsense in it. But I asked a few tough questions, and that was the end of. She never came back. Never wanted to come back on. But wouldn't this be the chance to say, "Hey, Rosie, didn't you tell us in the beginning that no evidence was allowed? It was a travesty of justice. Didn't you say that in the beginning of the show?" Clearly, the convicted killer himself is saying that's untrue. It was on your podcast. Did you not hear him? What's going on? Do you get that some of it was let in? Do you think not enough was let in? And why wasn't it enough? Or what do you know about the evidence that was let in? And why wasn't that enough? She doesn't know what she's talking about, this woman.
Get a little skeptical when that happens, right? You allow cameras, and all of a sudden you don't allow cameras. And to me, transparency
and you don't allow a defense. And you don't allow a defense.
What? And what? Did we just hear that they were allowed a defense? Am I going crazy, or did we just not hear Lyle say that his defense was limited in scope because it was a gigantic, confusing mess to put Kitty and Jose on trial? I don't think they're, you know what's interesting? Do I still have it? Hold on one second. Let me get this. This is important here. If you can just be patient for a hot minute. It's a short that someone put up. Bless them for putting it up. But strangely, Eric's lawyer, Leslie Abramson, is also against having, here it is. Hold on one second. Okay, here we go. So I'm sorry it's a short, it's kind of like awkward looking here, but check out what she says about cameras in courtrooms.
Cameras are only interested in viewing lurid trials, in doing the soap opera, sort of cheap, free soap opera is what I always thought was the real interest. And I've always been opposed to cameras in the courtroom. Cameras are only interested in...
She's always been opposed to cameras in the courtroom, if you didn't catch that. Their own defense team.
That was their defense. They had proof. They had witness.
So their own defense team, when it didn't want cameras in the courtroom, or at least half of it. Because it makes it a spectacle. And I used to, when I started this podcast, I used to think, cameras in the courtroom were great, transparency, everyone will learn about our legal system. But that doesn't happen. Because what people really watch are like a few highlights. Very few people watch the entire trial. And even when the entire trial is on video record, it's still manipulated. So I think it makes it a spectacle. It's a very, I'm not for cameras in the courtroom. If you want to watch a trial, we have open courts in this country. Go. It's not hard. You just walk in the front door. I encourage everyone in my audience to do it. Walk in, watch night court, watch criminal court, whatever you're interested in, civil court. We have, in any town, city in America, we have court cases going on all the time. Walk into one and watch our justice system unfold in real time.
Witnesses, 50-something witnesses, and they decide at the second trial, because O.J. Simpson they lost, the riots in L.A., there was a lot of need to get a conviction. And so they stacked the cards, they loaded the deck, and they told them, you can have no defense. You can have no defense. Let's go. You're guilty for life. Get out. Yeah. And that was 34 years ago. And times have changed, and people need to reframe what happened to those boys.
Well, I want to talk about the road. I want to talk, Rosie, I want to talk about the legal.
The men that they are now, the men that they were. They were men then. But she's like, nope, not till 26. She's going to redefine age now to 26 is now adults, along with Chicago.
Road. I read through the papers that were filed by Mark Garagos, and to me, it really comes down to this thing called imperfect self-defense, because that's what Mark is arguing for the.
He's still arguing the imperfect self-defense argument. They're wondering why they're not getting anywhere with this. It's a little hard to argue imperfect self-defense when you plan it out, plan out a murder, plan out your alibi, cry on the 911 call, then confess to your therapist in a way that no way matches the story that you tell in court.
The Menendez brothers is that it's...
And then hire a computer expert to go into your father's computer and erase his will. Little bit of a problem. Shows, and then go on that spending spree. This whole new line about that no one said this, that the spending was normal. The spending, I mean, it would be so over the top. The Menendez family would be broke if they were spending at a level like this. That's why he wasn't given a $50,000 a month tennis coach, Eric. They were rich, but not that rich. The money wasn't endless.
It's not self-defense, but it's imperfect self-defense, which would equal voluntary manslaughter, which means they have maxed out in the time. So I just want to put up on the screen so people understand what imperfect self-defense is. In the California model jury instructions, the defendant acted in imperfect self-defense or imperfect defense of another, which is what Lyle would be doing for Eric, if the defendant actually believed that he or she was in imminent danger of being killed or suffering great bodily injury.
Right. So this is really the crux. And I'm really happy, strangely, for me, because I'm so unhappy so many times with the way Vinny does this program. I wish he put this up first in the show, not at the end when few people are going to watch it. But this is really important because why people soured on the Menendez brothers is in the hoopla of what Leslie Abramson works very much like someone trying to sell you something very fast and on your emotions. So you're like, buy this thing, it's great, blah, blah, blah. Have you ever gone in and like, I don't know, had a makeover at a department store and like walked out with a whole bunch of makeup? You're like, I need, they put you under that terrible lighting. You're like, I need all of it. I need all of it. Give me the concealer. Give me this. Just spackle it on. I'm going to wear 5 pounds of makeup every day and I'm going to just charge $500 to my credit card. And you walk out and then 2 minutes later, you're like, what do I need all this crap for? What did I do? Or like you get just sort of like, you buy impulsivity. She works on impulsivity and emotions. And after hours and days of like the jury hearing how horrible both the parents were, you're like, and you just, and also liking, she's very likable, Leslie Abramson in the courtroom. She could really turn on the charm. And watching her fix their sweaters and, they, and always very well behaved in the courtroom. Totally inappropriate and affect totally off for what they did, but okay. And then you watch how they tailored this their story, tailored a story to match this imperfect defense. And when you think about it, you're like, of course their parents weren't trying to kill them. They were eating ice cream and watching TV. No reasonable or unreasonable person could think. In this whole story about how Lyle's wig came off and then all the family secrets came out. And then you combine that with the 911 call and the stealing and the getting kicked out of Princeton and the using their friend's ID unbeknownst to him to buy a gun. I mean, come on. They're a bunch of scumbags who didn't want to go to prison. And lied under oath on the stand and then got their cousins to lie under oath. That's what I think happened. And I'd love to know the connection between this guy and Menudo and the family. But certainly it was very interesting that the first thing out of Lyle's mouth is like, I don't know this guy. Never met him. Have no connection to him. It's on my dad's record label. I didn't know. I had no idea, wink, wink, that he was being abused in a similar way. Just came out in this documentary, strangely. right when I have Mark Garagos. Where has Mark Garagos been? And who's paying for him? Is it Rosie's money? Because all these new memories have come up with Mark Garagos at the helm, who I watched in court represent Claire Bronfman in the NXIVM case. And that's another story. I'll get to that in a minute.
So you have to actually believe that. You have to have an honest belief. And then you have to actually believe the immediate use of deadly force was necessary to defend against the danger. Okay, and if one of these beliefs is unreasonable, then it's imperfect self-defense. So it doesn't have to be reasonable. It can be unreasonable belief, but it has to be an honest belief by Eric and Lyle that there was imminent danger. Here's the question I have, though, Rosie, and this is what bothers me also about this case, is there's Jose Menendez, right? He's clearly the lead of
Jose Menendez? You mean Jose Menendez? Why? What is their deal with not being able to say the victims' names?
Abuser.
Thank you.
The physical force. If they kill Jose, what imminent, immediate danger would Kitty pose to Lyle or to Eric at that point?
Right. It's a little hard to be in imminent danger of someone crawling on their hands and knees across the floor to get away.
Jose is taken out. Aren't the boys at that point, wouldn't they have a belief that they would be safe from any imminent danger? And that's the part that bothered me, was the double murder.
Yeah, well, you have to question, Vinny, whether or not the years of abuse and the mother choosing her husband over her sons, her little first grade school sons, 8 years old, saying, "Daddy does this to me," through a cousin. And somehow it stopped for Lyle, and he thought it stopped in the family, but come to find out 5 days before the murder that it did not. The mother knew, and she also was inappropriate sexually with Lyle when he was a young teenager. And she was participatory, and that's really their story, and it's in the evidence and on court TV.
Right, that's their story. Don't make me say they're Hey, Vinny, are you going to make me say the ridiculous story? Are you going to make me repeat the Menendez? Wait, you're making me repeat the Menendez's ridiculous story? That the mother was in on this too? Vinny's like, I got a little bit of a problem. You can't argue imminent danger when your mother, after in the process of eating ice cream, I think Bossy Texas just said, "What is her weapon? A spoon?" Very funny. Yeah, they're eating ice cream and watching TV, which of course they denied on the stand and caught in a terrible lie. But yeah, she washed Lyle's hair as a teenager, so she was participatory. It's not for me to say. Don't make me repeat this ridiculous story, Vinny, because it's so ridiculous. I don't want to repeat it. It's their story because it sounds good when they say it. They've had 34 years to perfect it. I'm new to this. It sounds ridiculous when I repeat it.
You can watch the whole trial, the first trial, where they actually were allowed to have a defense and decide for yourself whether in that rage, in that tinderbox of "Dad is going to kill us."
Daddy? Now he's daddy? I thought he was an inhumane, terrible human being. I don't know. I have the unpopular, having been raised with one parent in the biz, my godmother in the show business. These people should not have children. They really shouldn't. Now I'm thinking they shouldn't be allowed to vote either. They are broken. Their thought process is just emotions take over, zero accountability. Like, I've known zero people in Hollywood to ever, when they start doing their research, That's when you should get really scared and head for Z Hills. Because the research is like a bunch of Netflix documentaries and excerpts from the trial that have been put together by Menendez Fangirl, YouTube account Menendez Fangirl 3264.
They went in and that's what happened that night. Somebody was going to die, and it ended up horribly, their parents. And
right. Somebody was going to die. Somebody was going to die. It was just, it happened to be the brothers planning out for meticulously for weeks on end because they had to buy the guns. Why buy the gun with your friend's with your friend's ID if you're not going to commit a crime and you don't want traced back to you? Why pick up all the shotgun shells if it was such a crime of passion? And they remember when Rosie argued they were so unprepared for the police. Oh my gosh.
And it's a hard thing to swallow. It's a hard thing to sit through. And
it's a hard thing to swallow. And then she realizes that she's undersold their story. Their story is a hard thing to swallow, which means like it's a hard thing. Excuse me. It's a hard thing to believe. That's what that means when you say it's a hard thing to swallow. But she quickly corrects herself and says, "Oh, it's a hard thing to believe, like it's beyond belief," which it means something else. Hard thing to swallow.
And feel as though you're condoning it. I'm not condoning it.
See, she knows. She knows she's condoning it. It's exactly what you're doing, Rosie. You're condoning murder. You're advocating for two convicted killers who've had all the due process and been convicted by a jury who didn't just watch bits and pieces of the trial, sat through all the evidence. Unless you're going to read every bit, every court transcript, every appeals document, which, I don't even know what would matter now. She's been so brainwashed by Lyle Menendez. She's all in now. She's put her whole persona into this. We've never seen a celebrity advocate for a victim or a victim's family. Have you? Only seen them advocate for the release of killers. And it often ends up very badly. Thinking of Susan Sarandon, who advocated, she named her son after Jack Henry Abbott, who wrote In the Belly of the Beast. And he got out 2 weeks later and murdered. A waiter told him where the bathroom was, looked at him the wrong way, and he murdered him. So, and after that, Susan Sarandon doubles down and names her kid after the killer. And he ended it all when he was sent back to prison. But he was really celebrated also by Norman Mailer, went behind him, Jack Henry Abbott, and really promoted him.
I'm not excusing it, but I am trying to explain it to people who maybe have never experienced that kind of emotional abuse that comes to everyone in the household when incest is occurring.
So, Rosie, before we run out of time, first of all, thank you for the promo you just did for Court TV. That's always appreciated.
Rosie doesn't need to. I'm very familiar. with the dynamics. But she's acting as if the only outcome, if this was the only outcome to this kind of abuse, then we would have this, this kind of murder all the time. This would be a regular occurrence. Richard Adan, that's the victim's name. remembered a Dan. I didn't remember his first name off the top of my head. Murdered by Jack Henry Abbott. Luckily, he did us all a favor and ended his life.
How about the level of optimism? Because you've spent time with them. At this point, with this new information, new papers that have been filed, Mark Garagos on the case, how would you gauge their level of optimism?
I think it's the first time in 34 years that they really felt as though they have an opportunity to get out of there. Imagine at 21 and 18, somebody telling you life without the possibility of parole. You are in there forever, your life.
I believe that's when they did the crime, 18 and 21, not when they were convicted, but that will tell you the way Rosie's twisted in her head. There was a big span between when they were when they were charged and when they went on trial.
As you know, it is ended. And there's no way out of a life without sentence. It's very hard to get out of a life without sentence. But new evidence and a writ of habeas allows us the means to look at this case and to decide whether or not we as a culture.
What do you mean we? So what she's saying is, she's saying we good people. She's appealing to our, no one wants to see people locked up if we think they're innocent or wrongly convicted, or that if there's proof, but it's not like there's new evidence that they didn't do it. They still did it. And this imperfect defense is a massive problem for them. Because it was so planned, and their actions and their affect are so far off. Everything points to that they did it for this tremendous greed. Hold on, I'll just let her say her final sentences.
Culture didn't believe these boys telling a truth we weren't ready to handle as a nation.
Well, it was the dark ages. Thank God they've invented electricity since then. And actual, we didn't have microphones. Nobody could hear it. We actually, back then, Court TV, it was like a silent movie. We just had captions because sound hadn't been invented yet. And no one understood anything about this kind of essay abuse. Thank heavens. Sound has been invented and we understand these things much better.
Rosie O'Donnell, great.
All right, that's that. So, I think we've really done it. There is one thing I just want to check. I might just take a short break thanks for hanging out with me. If you've come this far with me, I'm just going to take a quickie break. I'll be right back. I just want to see if I can find one quick thing about celebrities and their celeb killers and their celebrity supporters. Don't go anywhere. I will be right back.
We don't take a break. Grab a snack or maybe a glass of wine. Roberta will be back in no time. This podcast is listener supported, so smash that like button and subscribe, or become a patron for exclusive content if you are so inclined. Have something to say? Shoot Roberta a super chat. She will do her best to read it on air without delay. Now Roberta's back and ready to put the true back in true crime. Here's Roberta.
All right. Yeah, unfortunately, this will be a bigger search for me, but that's what I have for today. I don't know. Expect this to be downvoted, put into oblivion. Certainly, the Menendez. Actually, I can share this with you before I go. The Menendez PR offensive is in full force. Right before, I think right after I did my first video on the Menendez brothers, I got a PR notice from People magazine. Netflix Menendez doc director says brothers won't discuss possibility of freedom. No false expectations. Their murder case is one of the most infamous in U.S. history. So Lyle and Eric Menendez had much to discuss over the course of 5 months, starting in 2002. And that's really interesting also, is that their defense has picked up since they've like joined forces. It's like the madness of two, like they're more dangerous together. Lyle, 56, and Eric, 53, spent more than 20 hours opening up to director Alejandro Hartman for the new Netflix documentary. Boy, is it terrible, I think. I mean, it just doesn't encapsulate the case at all. It's totally from the defense perspective. And if the prosecutor's talking, it's a talking point that benefits the defense. The Menendez brothers, streaming October 7th. One topic neither brother wants to discuss was the possibility of retrial. Eric didn't want to talk about that because he doesn't want to have false expectations, said Hartman. At first, Eric didn't want to participate in the documentary, but Lyle, who hasn't spoken publicly since he and Eric sat down with Barbara Walters. I mean, there's so many misspellings in this. What's going on with our media? Like, I'm a terrible speller too. I don't have the greatest punctuation. It's just, I'm just seeing more and more like incomplete sentences that don't make sense or misspellings. I guess there's so much demand for media. It's just being spat out at an epic rate with a lot of mistakes. So Eric spelled wrong, sat down with Barbara Walters for a televised interview in June 1996, agreed to talk to him. Like many siblings, the brothers have distant personalities, he said. Distinct personalities, excuse me. Lyle was raised to be the golden boy, the successor of his father, says Hartman. Eric was the much more shy, more linked to the mother. Sometimes you feel Lyle is trying to be in control of the situation, strangely like a psychopath. He says Eric was more open to talk directly about things. Both, he said, are very deep thinking people, very intelligent. I enjoyed talking to them, even though my wallet was a lot lighter when I left. No, that's not what he says. He says, even though we went through very hard parts of stories they told me, I enjoyed talking with them. That included detailing the alleged SA by their father, but not by their mother, strangely, and how they claimed their mother ignored it. No, so now the mother ignored it. I thought she joined in. I thought she was participatory. Didn't we just hear Rosie say she was participatory? They told me about big depressions, very hard moments during their incarceration. I'm sure there were. These days, Lyle keeps busy with projects to improve the life of prisoners, including starting a program to bring cats and dogs to the prison. Lyle really likes to work with other people, he says. Eric is more focused on his own spirituality. He meditates. He discovered art. I think I showed you last time his art in the prison. He believes the both regret killing. They both regret killing their parents, even though they've never said anything like it. I think there's like a moment in the documentary where they said that the remorse was overwhelming, when you get no feeling of remorse, or the grief was overwhelming, something like that, and you get no feeling from their voice or their speech pattern, that's what's going on. So that's what I have for today. Please hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, share this episode. Thanks for hanging out with me and watching this, and I'll be back tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern. Have a terrific night, everybody. I'm going to go out with my Menendez brothers hit single, I Did It for the Money. See you tomorrow.
with bloody dollar bills. We did it for the money. Kim K believes us, so does Rosie. Oh, strangers weep, we had it so bad. It's the Menendez Bro Show. Just release us from prison. We'll play victims so well. Squeeze out some tears. The truth we never tell. Looking for suckers to manipulate emotions. Someone with empathy, enough to fill oceans. Just break these prison bars. They'll appear on your YouTube show. Lie and sob and wink. If you know, you know. We did it for the money. We did it for the money. We console ourselves with Rolex watches, hand-tailored suits. Then our hand over designer fabric swatches. Broke into the computer, rewrote dad's will. A Jeep Wrangler for a lady paid with bloody dollar bills. We did it for the money. Kim K believes us, so does Rosie. Oh, strangers weep, we had it so bad. It's the Menendez Bro Show. Just release us from prison. We'll play victims so well. Squeeze out some tears. The truth we never tell. Looking for suckers to manipulate emotions. Someone with empathy, enough to fill oceans. Just break these prison bars. We'll appear on your YouTube show.